Thank you, Councillor Lang. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our remote meeting of the Central and East Planning Committee. My name is Councillor June Clark. I'm the chair of this committee meeting. I've got a few housekeeping things to mention before we start, so if you can bear with me, please.
Chair, sorry for interrupting. The live feed hasn't started yet.
Oh, all right. Did you come in too soon, Audrey? I thought that.
No.
Morning, Chair. Can I open the meeting, please?
Thank you, Councillor Lang. And for anybody who may have been watching earlier, I just need to make a quick apology that we just had a little bit of a false start there. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the remote meeting of the Central and East Area Planning Committee. My name is Councillor June Clark and I'm the chair of this committee. There are a few housekeeping issues that I need to go through, so if you can bear with me, please, as I run through these. And if any of them apply to you, then obviously you need to take heed. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a remote meeting and it's been streamed live to the Council's website and will be available for viewing for a minimum of 6 months. I would like to give a warm welcome to the members, to the officers and any members of the public or media who are watching and participating in this live stream of the meeting, especially those members of the public who are registered to speak. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I need to cover and make you aware of some housekeeping issues we need to follow so that the meeting runs as efficiently as possible. So for those participating in the meeting, please only speak when invited to speak by myself as chair. In the meantime, if you could keep your microphones muted at all times. I think we've already ascertained where the mute button is on the toolbars. For committee members, if you wish to speak, then before you wish to speak, and so that you can get into a queue system, could you please type RTS in the chat function, which will indicate to me that you wish to speak, and bearing in mind that all participants can see the message, so that's really all you need to type at the first instance. Once you've been invited to speak, please introduce yourself, giving your name and position, unless you've already been introduced in the meeting itself. As a fail-safe, if I happen to lose connection this morning, then Councillor Audrey Lang, who is the Vice Chair, will take over the meeting in my absence until the connection is restored. So we sincerely hope you don't lose the connection, Audrey, otherwise we will be in trouble there for a little while. So now I'll do some introductions and I will do this as though I'm sitting on the top table in the council chamber, which is easier for me if you don't mind. So I'm imagining my mind from the left. So Martin, could you introduce yourself, please?
Morning, Chair. It's Martin Tyndall, Committee Services Officer.
Thank you, Martin, and I believe you're taking the notes of the meeting this morning. Thank you. Ian, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Chairman. Ian Croft, Senior Committee Services Officer, and I'll be keeping an overview of today's meeting.
Thank you, Ian. Neil, could you come in now?
Morning, Neil Carter. I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Thank you, Neil. And now we have Sarah. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Chair. Sarah Eldridge, the Area Planning Team Leader.
Thank you very much for that, team. So if everyone's prepared, we're ready to start the meeting, and we'll move over now to the agenda. And for some of these items, I will be referring to Ian to come in. So the agenda, as we have in front of us this morning, item 1, apologies for absence.
We have received apologies from councillors Blaisdell, Cochrane, Iverson and Manchester.
Thank you, Ian. So item 2 on the agenda is substitute members.
We have Councillor Martin Clark as a substitute member for Councillor Manchester and Councillor Maitland as substitute member for Councillor Blaisdell.
Thank you, Ian. Now item 3 on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting, which was held back on the 10th of March this year. And I'm assuming that the committee have had sight of these minutes. And so what I will ask is, does anybody have any comments to make, or would anybody like to make any amendments to those minutes, please? I've had no indications from anybody that there are any changes or any amendments. So can we have a mover for those minutes, please?
You certainly can, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Councillor Paul Taylor, representing the people of Brandon here. I would like to formally move those minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. So do we have a seconder for those minutes, please?
I'll second the minutes, Chair. Councillor Mark Davidson from Craighead and Southmore.
Good morning, Councillor Davidson, and thank you for that. So now we move on to item 4 on the agenda, which are the declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from anybody? No, I haven't had indicated that anybody has any declarations. So thank you, everybody. And if we can move forward now to the main purpose of the meeting this morning, item 5, applications to be determined by the Area Planning Committee. And the first item, 5A, 11 Cedar Drive in Durham. And this application is for a change of use from a C3 family house to a C4 HMO, which is a house of multiple occupation, demolition of an existing garage and replacement with 2-storey side extension and single-storey extension to the rear. We have a presentation for this item, as we normally would in the council chamber, and so now I'll go across to Planning Officer George Spurgeon, who will be taking us through this presentation. So if we can all remain on mute while this presentation is going ahead, please. Thank you. Are you ready, George?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am the Planning Officer. If you give me a moment, I'll just upload the presentation. Okay, so as the Chair mentioned, the application is for a change of use to a C4 HMO and a couple of extensions to go along with that. I think it's important to mention at the very beginning that the application site lies outside of the Article 4 direction area, and therefore planning permission is not required to change the use of the property to a C4 HMO. With this being the case, the council does not have any control over whether this property is used as a C4 HMO, and therefore the potential impacts of this use cannot be considered as part of this application. I would also like to take the opportunity to clarify paragraph 48 of my committee report to state that delegated authority has been granted to consult on a possible introduction of a new Article 4 direction, which would cover the area, including the application site. However, this consultation has not yet been undertaken, and therefore, as it currently stands, there is no delegated authority to create a new Article 4 direction for this area. So simply put, in terms of this application, there's no Article 4 direction area, and a change of use does not actually require planning permission. So 11 Cedar Drive is a residential property located to the south of the Durham City Centre. Cedar Drive itself is a cul-de-sac that consists of 22 dwellings with a mix of semi-detached and detached properties. Number 11 is a semi-detached property that benefits from a driveway to the front, a garage to the side which is proposed to be demolished under this application, and a garden to the rear. There is a slight change in land levels on the site, with the land sloping up from the north towards the south. The result of this is that number 13 is on a slightly higher land level than number 11, and number 9 is on a slightly lower level. As you can see from the aerial photograph, on the eastern side of Cedar Drive, as you enter from St Oswald's Drive, the first 8 properties are all semi-detached properties, and 6 of these already have some sort of 2-storey side extension, with the pair of number 9 and 11 being the only 2 that currently do not. On to some site photographs. On the left-hand side, we can see the view towards the front of the house. Looking at the photograph at the top left, number 9 is on the left and number 11 is on the right. And on the photograph below, number 11 is on the left and number 13 is on the right. You can clearly see the driveway to the front, the garage, and the gap that there is between the garage and the side of number 13, which allows external access to the rear garden. Number 13 is currently being used as a C4 HMO, and you can see that this property already benefits from quite a large 2-storey side extension. The photographs on the right-hand side are taken looking towards the rear elevation of the property. Number 9 is the property on the right-hand side, and you can see the bay window, which serves a habitable room thought to be a living room. Looking at these photographs, the one at the top left is shown looking towards the end of the rear garden. You can see that there is a gate right at the bottom, which allows pedestrian access onto South Road beyond. The other 2 photographs are shown looking towards the rear elevation of number 13. The 2-storey element of the extension would not project further than the rear elevation of the property, in line with the current garage, as you can see. I think the photograph on the right is particularly useful to illustrate the change in land levels and how number 13 is on a slightly higher level than number 11. And finally, these photographs all show examples of similar 2-storey side extensions on the street. I would like to draw members' attention to the first 2, the top 2 photographs in particular. The one at the left is at number 3, and the one at the number right is number 15. These examples are very similar to the one proposed in this application. Onto the plans. The proposed site layout, you can see the extensions outlined in green. The side extension would retain a gap between the side of number 13 to continue to allow external access to the rear garden and to help avoid the creation of a terraced effect. To the front, the driveway is shown to be able to park 2 cars on it, and to the rear, provision is shown for bin and cycle storage. The existing floor plans are shown at the top and the proposed floor plans are shown at the bottom. I'll just summarise some of the internal changes that are proposed. In terms of the ground floor, the existing lounge at the front of the house is proposed to be converted into a bedroom, labelled as number 6. The rear extension is proposed to allow the enlargement of the dining area and the kitchen room, as well as an additional bedroom labelled as number 5 on the plan. Although the garage is to be demolished, the side extension would also provide room for a new garage, which is of a similar size to the existing. However, the length of this garage is short of the required standards set out in the Council's Parking and Accessibility Standards document, and therefore this has not been included in the overall number of in-curtilage car parking spaces that the property would benefit from after the development. In terms of the first floor, you can clearly see that the 2-storey element of the side extension would not extend beyond the rear elevation of the main house. The side extension would allow for the creation of an additional 2 bedrooms. However, bedroom 3 shown on the existing floor plan would be converted into an additional shower room. The result of all this is that the proposal would allow for an increase in 3 bedrooms, which would result in a total number of 6. With regards to the elevations, the existing are shown at the top, with the proposed elevation shown below. If we start on the left with the front elevation, members will be able to see that the proposed 2-storey side extension is of a very similar design as the examples shown on the previous slide at number 3 and number 15. The hip roof would match the shape of the existing, and the slight forward projection is also similar to that shown in these previous examples. The side elevation, I think, helps to show that the scale of the proposed rear extension is relatively small. The projection is limited to 2.3 metres, and it features a lean-to style pitched roof with a ridge height of 3.2 metres. It is worth noting that a ground floor rear extension with a projection of under 3 metres and under 4 metres in height would usually fall under permitted development. However, as you can see by the rear elevation, the extension does project beyond the original side wall of the house. So technically in this case, planning permission is required for the rear extension, but it should be noted that it is a relatively small scale. In terms of consultee responses, highways were consulted and they raised no objections to the proposal. The driveway was considered to be of a sufficient size to be able to park 2 cars on it without overhanging the public footpath. 2 in curtilage car parking spaces is considered to be sufficient to serve a property of this size with this number of bedrooms. Northumbrian Water also raised no objections to the proposal. However, they did request that the applicant was advised to contact them in the event that the application is approved, and this is regards to the position of the sewer line underground and the potential for the rear extension to maybe interfere with this. However, it should be noted that this is not a material planning consideration and something that would be dealt with under the building regulations process. Environmental health were also consulted and they made no objections to the proposal and considered that the application would not cause a statutory nuisance. The application has generated quite a high number of objections from local residents who've raised a wide range of concerns. These concerns are all detailed in the report, but I would just like to summarise a few of the key ones here. So concerns were raised with regards to the rear extension and the impact this would have on the occupants of number 9 Cedar Drive. This is the bay window that we saw on the previous slide that serves the living room. Concerns were raised that the extension would result in a loss of outlook, a loss of light and a loss of privacy, and this wouldn't be helped by being located up to the boundary. Concerns were also raised that the side extension would result in a terraced effect and that it would leave number 9 as the only traditional semi-detached property in the row of 8 that would not have been developed to the side at first floor level. Concerns were also raised regarding there being inadequate parking to serve the house after the development and that the dining area could be turned into a 7th bedroom. With regards to the 7th bedroom, it is noted that the application does not propose the creation of a 7th bedroom, and if the applicant decided further down the line to introduce a 7th bedroom, this would require planning permission for a change of use to a larger HMO under use class sui generis. However, this is not the case under this application. The 4 bullet points below were all concerns raised by neighbours, but these are not material planning considerations. Access to neighbouring land to build the extension, the position of the sewer, property values and restrictive covenants are not material planning considerations. This slide focuses on the concerns that were raised by local residents, particularly in relation to the change of use. As we previously mentioned, the change of use itself does not require planning permission. However, some reference has been made to the interim policy on student accommodation and local plan policy H9. However, this policy refers to changes of use, which does not require planning permission in this case, as well as extensions to existing HMOs. This property is not an existing HMO, and therefore these policies are not relevant in this case. The only other thing to mention on this slide in particular is the Article 4 area at the bottom. It is something that the council are looking into in terms of the introduction of a new Article 4 area to cover this area and the application site. However, at this time, there is no Article 4 area covering this site, and so planning permission is not required to use the property as a C4 HMO. So the main planning considerations of the application are the principle of the development, the impact on residential amenity, the impact upon the character and appearance of the area, and highway issues. So to conclude, the change of use from C3 to C4 HMO does not require planning permission, and therefore the council has no control over whether this property is used as a C4 HMO or not. Because of this, the potential impacts of using the property as a C4 HMO cannot be considered under this application. In terms of residential amenity, the rear extension is of a limited projection in height, and this is not considered to have an overbearing effect or result in overshadowing or loss of light on either the occupants of number 9 or number 13 Cedar Drive. The proposals are also not considered to result in any loss of privacy for neighbouring residents, as there is no windows located in either side elevation of the rear extension. In terms of the character and appearance of the area, the side extension, as we've seen, is very similar to a couple of examples that already exist on the street and would fit in very well with these. The property does have two car parking spaces in terms of the driveway. This is of a sufficient size to be able to park 2 cars within without overhanging the public footpath. And the number 2 car parking spaces within the curtilage of the property is sufficient to serve a property of this size with this number of bedrooms. To finish off with, it is acknowledged that we have received a number of objections to this proposal. These objections have been taken into account and addressed within the report. However, on balance, the proposals are considered to be in accordance with the relevant local plan policies. Therefore, officers are recommending that this application is approved subject to the usual conditions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, George. We do have 3 registered speakers, and we have a representation which will be read out by our Committee Services Officer, Ian, which is from the MP Mary Foy. I will start, as usual, with the representation from Durham City Parish Council, and I believe that's coming from Councillor Grenville Holland. So, Councillor Holland, could you?
Yes, you can hear me, can you, Joan?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
yes, we
fine,
ascertained that earlier, so thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a dilemma here. The use of this property is clearly stated as C3 to C4, and we must recognise this is the only intention for this property, and a committee should be careful not to allow it simply to slip through because there's an absence of an A4 article at the moment. We need to consider the impact this additional property as an HMO will have, and it is going to be an HMO. The local plan, incidentally, is not time expired, as the officer suggests in his report in paragraph 30. Indeed, it's now used regularly and successfully at appeal by government inspectors in their support of decisions made recently by this committee to refuse inappropriate planning applications. The parish council believes that there are 5 reasons why this application should be refused. First, in our judgment, it is contrary to saved City of Durham local plan policy H13 because it fails to promote the creation of sustainable, inclusive and mixed communities and maintain an appropriate housing mix in this part of Durham City, using the same criteria as those we use in the city centre. H13 clearly states that planning permission will not be granted for new development or changes of use which have a significant adverse effect on the character or appearance of residential areas or the amenities of the residents within them. So it's not just the appearance, the technical appearance of the property, it's the character and the amenities as well. And it is the adverse impact on the character and amenities of this small housing estate that should concern us. Secondly, and I know that the officer omitted this policy, H9, which is concerned solely with HMOs. And yet we ought to bear in mind what the city council, the old city council, said about HMOs. And it was arguing that the subdivision or conversion of houses for multiple occupation or proposals to extend or alter properties already in such use will only be permitted provided that, first of all, adequate parking in accordance with policy T10, privacy and amenity areas are provided or are already in existence. And secondly, with each HMOs, and we are going to see an HMO built here if you allow it, it will not adversely affect the amenities of nearby residents. As the residents will probably tell you, adequate parking cannot be provided for the proposed number of individual occupants for this property on Cedar Drive. Up to 6 parking slots are needed for 6 individual tenants, student or otherwise, because there's no authority to limit it to 2. So don't let's waffle about using public transport from this locality. It won't happen because it hasn't happened in the past. So as the residents will tell you, this additional HMO will adversely affect their amenities. The application certainly fails to meet the test of the Save Local Plan Policy H9 as applied to an HMO and T10 in terms of privacy, amenity and parking, and I think it should be refused. Thirdly, the Save Local Plan Policy Q8, which is also not mentioned by the officer, requires that new developments must offer, to quote, good quality pre-application discussion to provide adequate amenity and privacy for each dwelling and minimise the impact of the proposal upon the occupants of existing nearby and adjacent properties. And policy is endorsed in the NPPF, which promotes pre-application engagement on applications. Section 39 of the NPPF recommends that good quality pre-application discussion enables better coordination between the public and the private resources and improved outcomes for the community. Now, the Parish Council can find no evidence of any pre-application discussions having taken place in the preparation of this application for such a sensitive issue in this particular area. Perhaps residents will explain how this proposed development fails the tests of Q8. Fourth, this application is also contrary to the NPPF's stated aim in paragraph 127, which requires the creation of places with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users. Existing residents know just what awaits them if this conversion to yet another HMO is allowed to go ahead. And fifth, paragraph 91 of the NPPF encourages policies that achieve healthy, inclusive and safe places which are safe and accessible so that crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life or community cohesion. I'm sure the residents will tell you about the detrimental impact that they've already suffered from the HMOs on Cedar Drive. This application fails to meet the guidance, is therefore contrary to paragraph 91 of the NPPF. In summary, this application, in our opinion, fails 5 clear tests associated with the development of an HMO in a residential environment, and it should therefore be refused because it is contrary to local plan policies H9, H13, T10 and Q8, and NPPF paragraph 91 and section 39. And finally, committee, in coming to a decision, you may be tempted to back away from refusing this application simply because of the threat it may go to appeal. Well, let me tell you, in the last 12 months, there have been 6 appeals against refusals of HMOs in the city, and the Inspectorate has supported the County Council and the residents and turned down every single one of them. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. There's a little bit of a feedback. Have you turned your microphone off now? Thank you. Thank you. So, as is the usual protocol for introducing speakers in the committee meeting, and now we'll go to the local member, Councillor Liz Brown. So, Councillor Brown, could you unmute your microphone, please, and give your presentation to the committee now? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not quite sure how to follow that, but first of all, I'd like to thank the officer for his comprehensive report. However, I must disagree with him regarding permitted development. In my many years of attending planning committees, we have always been told by chairs and committee solicitors alike that it is paramount to only comment on the application that is before the committee on that day. I shall therefore be commenting on the whole of the application that is before us, part of which is for change of use from a C3 family house to a C4 HMO. Could I remind the committee that this application was validated by planners in its present. I am here today to support residents in their objections to this application. There is considerable local feeling against this proposed development, as can be seen by the number of objections, and having listened to the residents, I am hoping to give voice to those who cannot speak to this application, either because of time or technology constraints. This part of the Fairwall Hall estate was built in the mid-20th century. Many of the residents would agree that they are not in the first flush of youth, and I hope they'll forgive me for that phrase. They have raised their families in this quiet part of South Durham City, and they're hoping to spend their retirement years here and enjoy the tranquility. In their immediate area, they have also already assimilated 2 student houses into what is a close community in this part of Cedar Drive. Both are located close to number 11. The residents will no doubt tell you how these existing HMOs have already adversely affected them when they address you, the members of the committee. City of Durham Saved Policy H9 addresses the provision of HMOs in Durham City and this application is in breach of parts 1 and 2 of this policy. Part 1 states that applications will only be approved if adequate parking is provided. The HMO provision is for 6 people, and yet the property has parking for only 2 cars on the drive. Any other cars for residents and the inevitable visitors will have to park on a narrow street, which already suffers from parking problems associated with the high school opposite, and will possibly have problems with overspill student parking when the 2 new colleges are up and running. There is no parking permit scheme in this area to mitigate the effects of thoughtless parking. Saved policy T1 sustains policy H9 by stating that permission will not be granted for a development which will generate traffic, which will have a significant impact on the amenities of residents. Furthermore, bear in mind that quite apart from personal vehicles, 6 more people will generate significant additional traffic by shopping online, both for food and goods, something which long-term residents tend not to do, but which experience shows students regularly use. Part 2 of Policy H9 states that permission will only be granted for an HMO if it does not adversely affect the amenities of nearby residents. As a resident of a student area myself, believe me when I tell you that the student lifestyle is diametrically opposed to that of local residents and really does adversely affect residents' lives. I've also already mentioned the deliveries of goods, but there is also the regular incidence of antisocial behaviour, which is higher in student areas than in areas where family houses predominate. Police statistics confirm that the risk of crime is higher in student areas. Small, high-value items are a staple of student life. Add to this the presence of empty houses for 5 months a year, combined with a somewhat cavalier attitude to security, and you can see why. Finally, there is the essential keep of HMOs, which is honoured more in the breach than in the observance. I have lost count of the amount of management plans I've seen in my time, and not one of them has ever been enforced, or indeed proved enforceable. All of this does not lead to the healthy, balanced, safe and sustainable communities which paragraphs 62, 91 to 95 and 192 of the National Planning Policy Framework are designed to promote. These paragraphs are in place in order to safeguard the community in areas like Cedar Drive. I would therefore ask that the committee refuse this application for these reasons, and the fact that the adverse impacts of approving this application on the residents would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, of which there are none. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that representation, Councillor Brown. So now we will move over to Mr. Robert Williams. Mr. Williams, you can unmute your microphone now and address the committee. I do need to remind you that you have 5 minutes to present your case, and the committee clerk will inform you when you have 1 minute remaining if you choose to take up your full 5 minutes. So if you can start your representation now, please, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Can I just check you can hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of residents of Farewell Hall. This application to extend this property has received a large number of objections from 27 local residents, our county councillor, our parish council and the City of Durham Trust. Farewell Hall is a quiet area of family housing, much needed in Durham City to provide a mix and balance to the areas already dominated by student rented housing. Even if this was simply an application to extend and modernise the house at number 11, we would still ask the committee to address some concerns. However, the clear intention stated by the applicant is to create a HMO containing 6 adults in an enlarged house, and this raises deep concerns in our community. We've got 2 primary concerns in a street designed and built to enclose family homes. First, there'll be a significant loss of amenity. We already have 2 HMOs on Cedar Drive in a stretch of just 6 houses. Extending a third house at number 11 would place 11 adults in 2 adjacent enlarged houses right in the middle of an area of family homes. This is going to be hugely disruptive for us. For example, the house next door to number 11, number 13, is already a house which has been extended and is now occupied by 5 or 6 students. The experience of the immediate neighbours is having to go out in the early hours and attempt to calm a rowdy and drunken party in the front garden, having to ask temporary residents of number 13 to move their cars so others could get off their drives, only to be told they'd been drinking so they could not move them. When number 13 has been occupied by 5 professional temporary residents, 5 cars were parked there. This blocked the street. As a result, the bin lorry could not clear the bins for most of Cedar Drive. The front garden of number 3 Cedar Drive, which is an extended HMO house of 5 adults, has been dug up and covered in stone to allow parking off street, an ugly conversion that significantly changed the character of the house, and which also showed recognition by one landlord of the issues we already have with parking on Cedar Drive. The proposed development of 11 Cedar Drive will clearly cause harm to the living conditions of the occupiers of neighbouring family homes and will have an adverse impact on the balance of the housing mix, damaging the social cohesion of the Farewell Hall community. We understand that this will be contrary to policy H13 of the City of Durham local plan. The extension of 11 Cedar Drive to allow it to become a HMO will introduce noise, disruptive parking, issues relating to bin collection, erosion and loss of community spirit, and the neglect or destruction of the frontage of this property, causing negative change in the character of Cedar Drive. Secondly, there's problems associated with traffic and parking. The applicant claims that 2 cars can be parked on the drive. That actually doesn't solve the parking problem this extended house will create. With 6 residents proposed, what happens if all 6 have a car? As we've already found out with the existing HMOs in our midst, there are no restrictions on the number of cars, and 2 spaces cannot be considered adequate when the type of occupant is not restricted. And yet Cedar Drive is only 6 metres wide with houses and driveways on both sides. When cars are allowed to park on both sides of the road width is not sufficient to allow a bin lorry or other larger delivery vehicle to get along the street, as has been already seen by long-term residents of Cedar Drive. Northern Power Grid has not been consulted, but they need additional on-street parking will block access further up the road, and Nedl needs 24/7 access to its substation further along Cedar Drive. In summary, we request that members reject this application to extend number 11 because of the adverse impact its resulting use will have on our community. Another HMO in a stretch of just 6 homes will add further disruption to our small neighbourhood of families with a mix of old and young residents. Our experience shows that those who temporarily occupy these HMOs have no interest or regard for our balanced community and have so far shown no concern for our welfare in their conduct. The way they block the road with their cars, the way they leave their bins out obstructing the street, and the extended houses built for HMOs have also had no regard for the quality and character of the street. In conclusion, the residents of Farewell Hall would be most grateful if members can find a way to support local residents and refuse this application to protect the character of the estate, the quiet amenity of immediate neighbours, and to prevent traffic issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement, Mr. Williams. Now, as I previously mentioned, we do have a representation from the MP, Mary Foy, and I'll move over to Committee Services Member Ian Croft to read that representation out for the committee. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Mary's representation is as follows. This application for an HMO is in an area of the city that remains mostly populated by families and elderly residents. As such, it is one of the few locations in what could be considered the city has not seen a huge increase in the number of HMOs, although several have appeared recently. Although the conversion to an HMO does not require planning permission and so cannot be considered by the committee, there are, however, a number of concerns that my constituents have raised that they feel will fundamentally affect the local area in a number of ways. First, there is the issue of traffic. This application is for the demolition of an existing garage and the construction of an extension to the side and the rear of the property. The properties along Cedar Drive are 70 detached properties, with many having extended above existing garages, but none having extended to the rear. As such, if these properties are used as family homes, then there would usually be adequate off-street parking for these properties. This application, however, proposes removing the garage but introducing 6 bedrooms to the property. As Cedar Drive is a narrow street where on-street parking would either block the road or access to another property, it is hard to see how this was assessed as having adequate parking. Safety Policy T1 indicates that the council will not grant planning permission for development that would generate traffic which would be detrimental to highway safety and or have a significant effect on the amenity of occupiers of neighbouring property. Given that this property will house 6 unrelated people, it is easy to see that this development could introduce an unacceptable level of vehicles to the street and will significantly affect the amenity of local residents. Furthermore, H9 states that the conversion of properties will only be permitted if it will not affect the amenity of nearby residents. Given the traffic issue and the fact that my constituents have reported that even with the small number of HMOs in the area, the disruption is such that they feel the need to move away from the area, this application for the development of the property to incorporate 6 bedrooms would breach this policy. I am also aware of a number of other issues that have been raised by our constituents, including the effect that the extension would have on the amenity of number 9 Cedar Drive through the loss of privacy and daylight. This would seem to be in contravention of policies H13 and Q9. Ultimately, while there is no current mechanism to stop the conversion of this property into an HMO, it seems unlikely that this application for an extension would be proceeding without the intention to change the use of the property. Indeed, one more additional occupant of the property would push this property into the realm of a large HMO and require planning permission, as this would then be sui generis. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Now we do actually have the applicant with us this morning, Gabrielle Moore. So Gabrielle, can you make yourself known, please, and unmute your microphone, and it will be your turn to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now. So if you can give us your representations, please, and then we'll go back to the planning officer, George Spurgeon.
Thank you. The intention is that the garage is to be used. It has been put on the plans to be taken down and rebuilt because it doesn't have foundations to hold an extension above it. The garage that is included in the plans, if anybody, including Mary Foy, looks, is 4 metres long, which is long enough to park most cars these days. There's also parking for 2 cars outside the house, not going onto the street. If you drive up and down Cedar Drive, you will find that it's quite an affluent area, and the residents there have usually 2 or more cars, which is way more than any students would have if you had a group of 6. And that's from my experience as a student landlord for 10 years. And rarely have kids who have more than 1 car per household. Usually they don't have a car. Councillor Holland's representation I found very saddening and very shocking. The prejudgment that students are involved with crime, I think is just awful. I have, out of all my houses, had 1 problem with the law, and that was recent, and it was nothing to do with students. It was not a student house, and it's cost me a lot of money and not students. I find that quite shocking. I would like people to ask themselves if they have children who have been students, or if they were students themselves, and to stop prejudging the students in our community. Councillor Mrs Brown has been complaining about possible deliveries causing traffic in the area. Well, surely people either get in their car and go out to a shop and buy their things and come back again, or have them delivered by a van, which is the same amount of traffic on the road. She's also pointed out that houses are occupied by students are empty for 5 months of the year. So you can either take your peace and quiet for 5 months, or think that there are cars coming on the road delivering shopping. I'm not quite sure about the logicality there. A sui generis, if you wanted to have a sui generis in this house, and if I did, then I would have applied for that. I don't. My student houses have big rooms for students. My kids are students, and I want the houses that I have to be the same as I would want them to be living in. If you had a 7-bed sui generis, you would need a living room. So you can't put that house as a 7-bed sui generis, and I don't want that either. So please be assured it would never be more than 6 bedrooms. And the garage is intended to be used as garage. One person spoke and said that there were no other extensions at the back of the houses. If you look on the council website, you will find that number 4 Cedar Drive has a much larger extension at the back than I have asked for. I've asked for my house development to be absolutely in line with the other houses in the street. I have friends that live nearby. I don't want them to have an embarrassment of a house in their street. I have a friend who lives in another street in Durham where there are a lot of students. She is late 80s and her husband's in his 90s. They had a house come up for sale next to them and they rang me and asked me to buy it because they knew that I would take care of it and any problems with students, which I haven't had, I would sort out. The only thing that they have ever said to me was that the house opposite that I own, the opaque glass wasn't opaque enough and they could see through it. So I put a blind up there. I've never had any complaints. So I would appreciate all of those things to be considered, and I really would like people to stop prejudging students. A mixed community is exactly that, a mix of normal residents who go to work every day, people of low income and students. So I find this snobby attitude quite upsetting. Thank you.
Thank you for that representation, Gabrielle. So as I previously mentioned, we will go over now to the Planning Officer, George's version. But before I do that, Councillor Shuttleworth, you've indicated you've got your hand up on the screen. This isn't the time for the committee to come into the debate. So are you able to remove that hand from the screen, please, and use the RTS function when I move over to the committee for debate?
I did try the RTS function and it wasn't working for some. I've got technical problems with this, but I wanted to come in. I clicked on that, hoping that somebody would pick it up later on, you know. Right,
yes. So if you could remove that, and then perhaps if you can't use the chat function, maybe we'll just have to go with you using the hand if that's the case.
I'll get that looked up after the meeting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. So if you can remove it now, thank you very much, and put your microphone back on mute, and then now we can go over to George. Sorry about that, George. If you want to come back with any points you may have now, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of things just to point out. First of all, reference was made to policy H9 by a couple of the speakers. Just to clarify, this policy is not considered to be relevant to this application because the change of use does not require planning permission in itself, and the extension is not to an existing HMO. The property is currently C3 use, so the policy just doesn't apply. Therefore, the impacts aren't considered, should not be considered. Councillor Holland made reference to previous appeals that the council has been successful in defending and upholding against refusals to previous changes of uses and similar applications. It should be noted that this application is different in the fact that it lies outside of the Article 4 direction, and so a comparison should not be made between these applications. And I think it's quite dangerous to sort of just assume that just because we've won an appeal in some cases that we should just then automatically start thinking about refusing applications. They should be judged on their own merits. Another point that was mentioned was with regards to pre-application advice. Officers do advocate applicants engaging in pre-application advice to sort of help improve the quality of development. This is not a requirement, and this would not participating in pre-application advice would not result in officer taking a less favourable view of an application. The application would be judged on its merits. There was a few other issues mentioned. If I could pass to Neil just to clarify, I think the sort of fallback position in terms of the permitted development change of use, and then after that, if we could go to John McGargle from Highways, just in response to some of the parking issues that have been raised. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Chair. Neil Carter, Legal Services. Yes, just to pick up on the issue of the use, because we have heard from objectors today about issues that are relevant to the change of use of the property. Whilst it is included as part of the description of the development, and therefore, if this application is approved today, that will result in a permission that covers the change of use. The position that we've taken is that because the use is permitted development, so the change of use from C3 to C4 already has a deemed planning permission, then the principle of that use is established, and that's why the officer is concentrating in his report on the built form of the development, so the extensions. So as he says, that's a significant fallback position for the applicant, and that's why we've taken the view that really the principle of that use is established already.
Right, thank you, Neil. So you wanted to go over to John McGarrigle as well? George?
Yes, please, Chair.
Yes, so John, can you come in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I'm John McGarrigle, Highways Development Manager. We've heard from the objectors there, Chair, that they feel that we should provide a parking space in Kirtledge for each bedroom that's being provided for the development. We wouldn't normally request that for any other type of residential development. A 3-bedroom house isn't expected to provide 3 parking spaces. Indeed, a 4-bedroom house isn't expected to provide 4. So to suggest that this is a 6-bedroom house needs to provide 6 spaces, I don't see the reason behind that, and that's certainly not within our parking standards. There are 2 in Kirtledge parking spaces, as we've heard, and a garage. The garage is actually 5 metres in length, so we felt it was slightly short for a standard vehicle to be able to squeeze in there, so we didn't count that. But we felt, okay, there's going to be 2 off-street parking spaces being provided for this development. We've heard there's already two HMOs in the street, and we've looked at what would be the impacts if there was more car ownership than 2 parking spaces. Well, the impact would be that people would park on street. The question is that would that have a significant effect on the immunity of the neighbours? Would that be contrary to T1? We felt in general it wouldn't be that if we do end up with a vehicle parked on street, then that could be acceptable. It's got to be borne in mind that car ownership within the EAP area is about 75%. It's not 100%, so we wouldn't expect 100% of students, and in particular in Durham City, student car ownership is nowhere near 75%. There is a bus stop on South Road outside the back of the property, which is easily accessed. As we've heard, the property would potentially be served by sort of service vehicles dropping off shopping, etc. So car ownership is not, we feel, going to be as high as being suggested. As I've said, I don't think it is contrary to T1. It's not a significant effect on the immunity of the neighbourhood if there is an additional car parked on street. The street's 5.5 metres wide. It's wide enough to park cars alongside the footway, and for service vehicles and emergency service vehicles to be able to pass parked cars. Obviously, we rely upon people parking cars without obstructing the street. If cars were parked opposite each other on the street, it creates a problem. That's in every street. That wouldn't be different to any other street if cars parked in that way. With regards to policy T10, it was suggested, well, it's contrary to policy T10. Policy T10, there's a bit of a contradiction here, because policy T10 actually seeks to limit the amount of parking space being provided and so encourage sustainable transport. So it's a bit of a contradiction there in saying that it doesn't provide enough parking. It's contravention of T10. As I've said, it is, in our view, a sustainable location with bus stops out the rear. There was a question about policy H9, which says, is there adequate parking and the immunity that has in the area? As I've said, I feel that if there were six vehicles parked here, we may well find that vehicles park on street. If I could, Chair, I'd just like to share a Google image of the street itself. Just bear with me 1 second. As I've said, the street's 5.5 metres wide, residential street. Hopefully you can see that, Chair. There is some parking on street. We've heard there's 22 units on street. All of those units have off-street parking. And from the view that we're taking, Chair, that street's adequate to be able to allow emergency service and service vehicles to proceed past those parked vehicles. Thank you, Chair. Prepared to take any questions.
Yeah. Thank you for that additional information, John. Can you take your picture down off the screen now if you can fathom out? I'll go back to you, George. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we move over to the committee?
Not at this stage, thank you, Chair.
No. Right, okay then. So committee, it's now over to yourselves, and I have previously mentioned if you could use the chat function, please, and indicate to speak by using the letters RTS. Bear in mind that everybody will be able to see what you put in that chat box, so that's all that's required. I am going to endeavour to make a list and deal with everybody in order, so please bear with me if I do make a little bit of a slip and overlook you, but I'll do my best. So at the moment we have Councillor Paul Taylor who wishes to speak, and I have seen that you have your hand raised, Councillor Shuttleworth, so I will bring you in next. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, and thank you to George Spurgeon for an excellent report. It was really helpful, very informative, and I must mention Councillor Brown and Councillor Holland as well. Their local knowledge and their care of their community is great credit, just great credit to them. So I was therefore very, I don't know how to term this, very disappointed. I found the applicant's tone a little confrontational, which is very regretful. We're all trying to do the best thing for the community here and say that the right thing is done. Now, on the face of it, looking at this, I would like to resist this. It's a lovely family area, I have to say. And I'm very much against the proliferation of business opportunities to cram more students into residential areas. So let's make no bones about it. All of the lovely words are there, and I don't discount them and I don't disagree with them, but it is a business opportunity in a residential area. Now, that said, Grenville and Liz, we're struggling here. It is permitted development, that's established. So finding reasons to turn this down is very, very difficult. And believe me, I've looked and I've listened to what you've had to say as well. And I think we will struggle, unfortunately, much as I regret saying that. You know myself, we are the members, it is our decision, it is up to us, and we can make the case. We can make totally the opposite case to officers if we feel that we are in the right. And I would make that case, but I listen to you both, and unfortunately I can't make a case that I feel will be sustainable. And I'm not frightened of appeal, Councillor Holland, not frightened whatsoever. I'm always very determined and very happy to put together an alternative case to officers. But in this particular instance, I feel we're struggling, and I regret that, I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Shuttleworth, you wish to come in, so can you remove the hand and unmute your microphone now, please, and speak to the rest of the committee? Thank you.
Can you hear me there, Chair?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everybody else hear you, Councillor Shuttleworth?
Yeah,
if everybody can nod, right, thank you.
I mean, as Councillor Taylor just said, we do have a problem here, but, the residents of Durham City are sick and tired of HMOs. It's destroying the city centre, and we've got all these places the university have built. We just seem to be pandering to the university, and it's not fair to the residents who live here, who use the shops, and who actually pay money to this council. The students don't pay money to this council, and I just think people need to be aware of that. But I think it's totally unfair if we allow this to go forward. I know we have a problem, but like Councillor Taylor says, let it go to an appeal. Thank you.
Nothing else to add, right? Thank you very much for that, Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Freeman, you wish to speak. Councillor Freeman? Have we lost Councillor Freeman? Right, I'm a little bit of lost. Sorry?
Are you still in attendance?
He is.
His microphone is muted.
Yeah, but he should be able to hear me. Councillor Freeman? Well, in the absence of any response from Councillor Freeman, is there any other member of the committee who would like to speak? Right. Councillor Gardner, I believe you've indicated that you'd like to speak.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. First of all, just to let the whole of the committee know, and also people who are watching on YouTube or in attendance, that I do actually work at St Mary's College at the university. So I am wholly aware of how students do act on occasion within some of the HMOs, and also the applicant. You know that at the end of the day, the students are needing homes. That's just the nature of the fact that the university is expanding at such a rapid rate. But there's also a need to protect residents. Looking at this, and thank you very much, Neil, for sort of clarifying things as far as the application is concerned. I do see that we are kind of got our hands tied, and I don't know where we go from this. I'd like to stand with the residents, but I don't know if this will just go straight to appeal and be straight overturned. So I'm in two minds. I don't know really which way to turn. I do support the applicant and also the officer, but I really do stand with the residents, because I do appreciate that in really quiet areas, the last thing you want is a student accommodation that may have an extra 6 on top of the ones that are already there. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. I have something on my screen, the same. I imagine everybody else will have the same, that indicates that Councillor Freeman's left the meeting, which I'm not sure whether he's just inadvertently pressed the wrong button there.
Oh, I'm still here.
You're still there. So, David, would you like to come in now?
Yeah, purely a technical fault, because I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, we're all. So is everybody else on mute while we listen to Councillor Freeman? Yes, thank you, David. If you can go ahead now.
Thanks. I mean, like the other speakers, I have a lot of sympathy for the residents' position, and I didn't quite understand why we couldn't use, well, why we shouldn't be looking at H9, which hasn't been in the committee report. Because it does seem to me that this is planning permission to change the use of the property, so therefore we are going to have an HMO, and therefore H9 does seem an appropriate planning policy for us to use to look at this application. And if we were to use that that planning policy, then it would seem to me that H9 and H13 are grounds to look again at this application and possibly refuse it. So I wasn't exactly clear why we can't use H9. I know that Councillor Holland has referred to H9. It seems to me that H9 is still an appropriate policy to refuse this application, because it is going to be another student property in a street, a very small street, where there's already 2 student properties, and inevitably that will affect the balance of the community, but also the amenity of local residents. So just some clarity on that, please.
Who do we think is best placed to come in and answer those issues?
I'll respond if I may, Chair.
Right, I'll just, Councillor Freeman, have you got your microphone on mute again? Right, thank you. Right, George, if you want to come in now.
Thank you. So policy H9 refers specifically to changes of use to subdivide houses, which would include C4 HMOs, as well as extensions to existing HMOs. Now, as we've mentioned, the application site falls outside of an Article 4 direction. Therefore, planning permission is not required to change the use of the property to a C4 HMO. So therefore, we can't apply policy H9 to this application, because if we refuse this application, the applicant will simply convert the property into a C4 HMO anyway, because it's possible to do so under permitted development. In terms of the extensions, the policy is clear that it refers to extensions to existing HMOs, and this property is not an existing HMO, and for that reason it's still in use as a C3 dwelling. So for that reason, officers are of the view that policy H9 does not apply to this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that explanation, George. Do we have any other members of the committee who would like to speak, please, or anybody who wishes to put forward a motion? Would anybody, if nobody is nobody's wanting to speak at this moment. Is anybody ready to put forward a motion?
Chair, Neil Castle, Legal Services. I think Councillor Mark Davidson wants to speak.
Yes, I've seen the substance of the comment. I'm not sure whether it's something that's relevant to the actual discussion that we're having at the moment. Mark, would you like to come in about the application?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just got quite another question for John McGargle, really, about the highway situation. I'm just wondering, we've had these similar things before, let's say, in areas where there's permit parking and people don't get any permits, etc., etc. There's also a cycle store around the back as well. So I'm just wondering, can you in your submission before, you said that 75% of people owned a car in the AP area or whatever, but students will be much lower than that. So can you tell us what the guidance is and what our parking standards actually are for these type of properties, and just give us a little bit more information on that, really, because I thought that was it was interesting, but it was a bit sort of woolly. If you can just flesh that out a bit, please, John.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, our parking standards contain standards for residential development up to 4 bedrooms. We don't actually specify a number of parking spaces beyond four bedrooms. Generally speaking, you know, 4 bedroom properties on that sort of coming up that regular, and we didn't feel there was a need to provide a standard for a 6 bedroom property. 6 bedroom properties in general provide enough in curtilage parking. What our standard does say is that you have to provide a minimum of 2 parking spaces. This development meets that standard in that it provides a minimum of 2 parking spaces. But as I've said, it's more about would there be adequate parking, and I've looked at sort of what we consider would be car ownership levels. Obviously, if everyone had demand for car parking space for every bedroom in a property, the street would be blocked now. You know, there's no doubt about that. There's so many bedrooms in those properties, for the 22 properties existing, that you wouldn't have enough parking space in curtilage or on street. But that's not how parking standards work. What we have looked at is what is the likely, you know, car ownership, and even at the sort of 75% level of car ownership, you know, if we end up with 4 cars there, we may end up with 2 cars parking on street. Is there adequate parking space? Well, we believe so. We believe that you know, the street is wide enough for people to be able to park responsibly without causing any obstruction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Do any other members of the committee wish to speak, or is anybody in a position where they would like to put forward a motion?
June, I know I'm having trouble with my iPad this morning, so I'm very sorry that I can't press the RTS, just in case before. But if we can't find a policy that allows us to refuse this application, I'd like to move the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Lang. Do we have a seconder for the motion to approve the recommendation?
Chair, can I just come back in and ask another question, if that's all right?
I believe you can, Mark. We haven't gone to a vote, so yes, if you'd like to ask a supplementary question. Who is it to?
I just want to ask a question about paragraph 54. Paragraph 54 is the paragraph just above the conclusion, where it says that Councillor Brown's requested that if the application is approved, a condition requiring a construction management plan be imposed. So seeing we've got down to the fact that we can't really find we can't take into consideration the change to HMO. We've already had lots of pictures of properties that have similar extensions. We're probably moving down a road of acceptance. So I'm just wondering whether we can discuss this and consider this. So I don't know whether the planning officer wants to come in and talk about section 54, or whether we can ask Councillor Brown what she sort of had in mind, because as everybody knows, construction management plans is always they're always a bugbear of mine, where stuff gets agreed and then residents have a nightmare while it's getting built. So if George, can you, sorry, it's probably your place to say, George, can you come in?
Yeah,
sure.
I think it might be, Mark, but what I'm suggesting is, are you actually requesting that if this is this is something that you would like to see as a consideration of the application if it was approved? Are you requesting that as a condition?
I just want to, usually yes, definitely, but I just want to hear what George says about it, because obviously the residents have come to say that that the streets sometimes blocked already. They have problems with refuse wagons, they have problems with deliveries and things like that. So I just don't want to exacerbate the situation by not having the one.
Right.
So
Right.
if George can tell us what he can reasonably do, then I think that it would be a good idea. Yes, Chair.
Right. Okay. Right. Thank you. So George, if you could clarify what you could put in place in terms of a construction management plan.
Yes, Chair. So in the report, it's noted that Councillor Brown, in her objection to the application, sort of suggested a construction management plan or similar to sort of help with protect the amenity of the residents whilst the development is actually taking place. Officers are not strictly of the view that this is necessary to make the development acceptable in this case. Construction management plans will usually require details of sort of larger types of development where the actual built work is going to take quite a long time to sort of take place and be completed. Details of a construction management plan would often include sort of hours of construction working, details of things like locations for the unloading and storage of materials. So what's suggested in the report is that we could potentially add an informative to a decision to advise the applicant on what reasonable construction working hours would be, and then hope that obviously they take that on board and sort of in compliance with that, and sort of the works are undertaken with that in mind. We're not recommending that a condition is attached requesting details of construction management plan to be required prior to the commencement of the works in this case.
But is that something that the committee could request?
Yeah, I suppose it is. I don't see why not.
Right, thank you, George. So could I come back to you now, Councillor Davidson? How does that answer fit with you?
Well, I don't know, what George's suggestion seems about as much use as a poke in the eye with a sharp stick to me. So I'd like to propose that we have like the simplest thing possible. We'll have a thing with times, making sure that it don't start at 6 o'clock in the morning when people are asleep and stuff. So I'm sure George can come up with some good times in a minute. But the main thing for me is that what people were talking about was that the street getting blocked. So can they put something forward to minimise the risk of the street getting blocked? So can they demolish the garage and then put the stuff on there or whatever? I don't know, but just something that'll minimise that, rather than we'll ask them to do an informative and play nice, but sometimes they don't.
Right, thank you for that, Mark. Now I do have Neil Carter, our legal officer, wishing to come back in, and other members of the committee. So Neil, I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to confirm that obviously whether this condition that's being proposed is necessary or not is really a matter of judgment. Now, we've heard from the planning officer, he thinks it isn't, but equally members could come to their own view on that, because it is a judgment issue, and if members think it is necessary, then that is a condition that could be added in. Right.
Thank you for that clarification, Neil. Councillor Taylor, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Well, actually, Councillor Davidson alluded to what I was going to suggest myself there. My concern is it's not particularly narrow road, but there are going to be problems there with deliveries to other houses, people accessing their homes if there's a skip in the road, and how does the refuge wagon get by? So I think we need to have some sort of control over that, because it is going to have a detrimental effect on the rest of the street. And as we all know, in our own areas, you know, we do have problems with streets being blocked with vehicles. In this instance, there could be traffic there. Well, there will be traffic related to the construction, and indeed perhaps skips outside. So that is a concern for me. So I think Mark's quite right to highlight that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lang, I believe you would like to speak.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think if I recollect on past things like this, there's lots of things we put times and things what Paul Taylor's just said. So yes, I would absolutely recommend that be done.
Yes,
along with Mark.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lang. Now, Councillor John Robinson, I believe you would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I second Councillor Mrs. Lang's proposal, and also comment that in the past, Chairman, when we got to a situation like this, we said, yes, we would like I'm looking exactly at a construction management plan putting in, and we've always then delegated to the officers along with consultation with the chair and the vice chair. And I can see no reason why we can't do exactly the same. So I formally second Councillor Mrs. Lang with the addition that a construction management plan be put in with a condition subject to consultation with yourself and the vice chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Now, just before we go to take a vote, I've had an indication from Councillor David Brown that he would like to speak. Councillor Brown, can I bring you in now, please, before we go to a vote?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Robinson has just taken the very words from my mouth. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I didn't want to not give you the opportunity to speak, though, so thanks for confirming that. Do we have any other motions? No. So we have a motion to approve the officer's recommendation, which was forwarded by Councillor Audrey Lang and seconded by Councillor John Robinson. Now, we are going to go through a little bit of a different process this time round, in as much as our legal officer, Neil Carter, will individually speak to each councillor. I'm not sure how you're going to do it, Neil, whether it's alphabetical or what, but Neil will speak to each councillor to have their decision recorded, and when we have the number count, I will then formally indicate what the decision is. So Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm going to do it alphabetically, and if I miss anybody out, I'm sure you'll remind me. So I'm going to go to Councillor Brown first. So are you? So the motion is to approve. Yes. Are you for or against that?
Support the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to move to Councillor Clark.
Which
Malcolm
one?
Clark. Sorry, Councillor Malcolm Clark.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Corrigan.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Coult.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Freeman.
Against the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Against the recommendation.
Okay. Councillor Lang.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Robinson.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Shuttleworth.
Against the recommendation.
And Councillor Taylor.
I'm against. There should be an Article 4 directive in place. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, I make that 8 for the recommendation and 4 against.
Thank you, Neil. So on the basis of the vote that's been taken just there, that motion is approved. So we will approve the officer's recommendation by a vote of 8 to 4. Thank you, committee. Now, I'm not sure whether the speakers would like to stay for the rest of the committee meeting, or you'd like to sign out now. It's entirely up to yourself. It's a public meeting, but we will move on to the agenda now, to item 5B, which is 75 Winnie Hill in Durham. This is the erection of a part 2-storey, part single-storey extension at the rear of an existing small HMO, house of multiple occupation, with a C4 class of use. And the planning officer to take us through this presentation is Lisa Marina. So Lisa, can I hand over to you, please? And if everybody else can have the microphones on mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Lisa Marina, Planning Officer, the Central and East team. I'm just going to load my PowerPoint up, if you bear with me a couple of moments. Thank you, Chair. Okay, we have, as an application for an extension to a small HMO property, which is at 75 Winnie Hill in Durham. It's a 2-storey semi-detached property, and as you can see on both the site location plan and aerial photo there, it is outlined in red. It is an unlisted property, but it is located within the conservation area. Winnie Hill is an elevated street that curves gently from its junction with Old Albert to the north to Stockton roundabout to the south. Residential properties surround the whole of the site, and they are former local authority, and there is a student population already within the area. The property in question is currently in use as a 4-bed student accommodation. Therefore, it already occupies the C4 use, and evidence has been provided to show that it was in use prior to the implementation of the Article 4. Therefore, planning permission was not required at the time it was converted to a C4 use. The application seeks the construction of a part single-storey, part 2-storey extension to the rear of the site. The single-storey element will project by 3 metres from the rear building line across half the width of the property, with a smaller projection to the adjacent property. Then we have a small single-storey projection at first floor level of around 1.2 metres. Just showing some photos there. Just to confirm that the application was referred to the committee at the request of the City of Durham Parish Council, who consider the proposal goes against relevant local plan policies and would not provide a mixed and balanced community. We've got some photos showing the rear of the site. The one to the left-hand side shows the relationship to the adjoining semi, and then we have one in the bottom right-hand corner which shows the rear elevation of the site. More photographs here again to the rear of the property, and it shows the relationship to the neighbour on the opposite side, and also a view from the front which shows the relationship between side windows on the existing property, which is shown to the right hand side on the bottom photo, and the neighbour's window on the left hand side. We have some floor plans here. On the left hand side we have the existing layout, on the right hand side the proposed layout, which you can see is indicated in red and shows some internal alterations required. The kitchen diner will be extended to become a kitchen lounge diner with the larger single-storey element which projects out 3 metres. An enlarged bedroom will be shown at ground floor, and then we have an additional bedroom at first floor with some other internal alterations proposed. We have some elevations. The existing elevations are shown along the top, with the proposed elevations along the bottom, again shown in a reddy orangey, shows the extent of the extensions involved. In terms of consultee comments, we had no objections from the Highway Authority. The property is within a controlled parking area. The police provided no response. The noise action team, environmental health team considered it would not cause a statutory nuisance. The design and conservation area considered the proposal would have a neutral impact. The HMO team have raised no objection, and it was also confirmed that there's 39.6% of properties within the 100-metre radius which are already in use as student properties. In terms of representations, 6 letters of representations were received, including those from Parish Council, Winnie Hill Community Group and the City of Durham Trust. A range of objections, including it does not promote a mixed and balanced community, the percentage is over 10% within the 100-metre radius, there would be an impact on the neighbouring property due to the expanse of the brick wall, concern that the proposal would result in an increase in up to 10 people being present on the site, that the residents' views aren't taken into account and we tend to ignore these views and go in favour of landlords, also that there's problems with rubbish and often excessive noise in respect of the neighbouring properties given it's in use as the C4, and also that the increase in the footfall would exaggerate these issues in terms of antisocial behaviour, poorly managed refuse, etc. Problems with traffic and parking, and that there's always been issues that the parish have had to that the parish council have been contacted regarding rubbish, etc., and that there would be, you know, increased comings and goings in terms of deliveries and takeaways, etc. The main planning considerations are the principle of the development, the visual impact of the development on the conservation area, residential amenity and highway safety issues. So in conclusion, the principle of the development is considered acceptable and the impact upon the residential amenity is also considered acceptable. The dwelling can accommodate the additional extension while providing sufficient levels of amenity for occupiers and the neighbouring properties. It would remain within a C4 use as only up to 6 residents are being proposed, therefore it does not result in a change of use, and if it was to go over that, it would require a further planning application to be submitted. Applications considered to meet the requirements of National Plan Policy Framework and relevant local plan policies. Whilst there is some conflict with the interim policy, it is not considered that a refusal reason, and all objections and concerns have been taken into account and addressed within the report. However, on balance, it is not felt that they are a sufficient way to justify refusal of this application. Therefore, approval is recommended. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that report, Lisa. Now we do have, we did have two people who had registered to speak. The first of those speakers in the normal process would be Councillor John Ashby from the City of Durham Parish Council. We did also have a representation from Mrs Headley, who has since sent in some written information which will be read after Councillor Ashby's representation by Ian Croft. So Councillor Ashby, can I introduce you to the meeting now, please? And if everybody else can leave their microphones on mute, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Can other people nod? Yes.
That's great. Thank you very much. So good morning.
Councillor Ashby.
And thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the City of Durham Parish Council. The applicant claimed that his proposal does not come under the Article 4 or interim policies. He is wrong, it does. He also says that no significant consultee objections have been received. Evidently, objections from the local community and the parish council are of no significance to him, but actually the parish council is a statutory consultee. The prevailing statutory development plan is the City of Durham Local Plan 2004. Saved Policy H9 only allows extensions if adequate parking is provided and the amenity of nearby residents is not adversely affected. The expansion of 75 Winnie Hill into a 6-bedroom student HMO in this area would increase the presence of people whose lifestyles are different to year-round residents and would so increase the very threat to nearby residential amenity that Part 2 of Saved Policy H9 is designed to prevent. And also the parking situation in Minnie Hill is dreadful in university term time. Many of the cars park on the pavements and on the verges. And for the highway officer to say that, and I quote, any additional cars brought to the site would be subject to parking charges, and therefore additional demand will be limited due to this reason, end of quote, ignores the actual situation on the ground during term time. And therefore, in our view as a parish council, the proposal is contrary to part 1 of policy H9 and should be refused on those grounds. But my principal purpose this morning is to give a fully up-to-date account of the policy position in respect of this application. The County Council's interim policy on student accommodation included opposition to extensions to HMOs in areas where over 10% of properties are student HMOs. And the interim policy, of course, carries weight. Having lost the appeal at 40 Hawthorne Terrace, referred to by the officer, the County Council, in its submitted County Durham plan policy for HMOs, proposed to drop that bit that opposed extensions to existing HMOs, and the Council's planning officers have therefore been granting approvals to extensions under delegated powers. The County Council has now reversed that temporary stance. It has formally proposed a main modification to the submitted plan to restore the restriction on extensions that result in additional bed spaces in existing HMOs. And this is accompanied, Chair, by proposed new text in the county plan as follows, and I'm quoting, quote, it is recognised that an extension to an HMO which results in additional bed spaces and therefore potentially accommodates more students would introduce further students into an area where there are already concerns about the impact of the student population on residential amenity of non-student residents. And for this reason, extensions to HMOs to accommodate bed spaces where the 10% tipping point is exceeded will not be supported, end of quote. And these are powerful and very welcome words, and they put the County Council in a strong position. The main modifications constitute formally adopted County Council policy and are therefore to be afforded significant weight, being very up to date. They're in response to an examination in public's inspector's specific question, and furthermore, the inspector has now informed the County Council that the proposed main modifications are necessary for making the plan sound. So the key argument put forward by the officer that extensions to HMOs are acceptable is entirely negated by the County Council's strong stance expressed in that quote. Indeed, this committee recently rejected proposals by this applicant for HMO extensions at 17 and 18 Providence Row on the very grounds set out in that quote. So in the case of 75 Win Hill, within a 100-metre radius, some 40% of properties are student accommodation exempt from council tax. Clearly, they are well in excess of the proportion allowed under the interim policies and the strengthened county plan policy. With 40% of properties being HMOs, this means that 60% are still year-round family houses, and it is wrong of the applicant to claim that the area has generally high student housing concentration, implying that it's too far gone to be worth trying to retain as a balanced community. The Parish Council concludes that this application should be refused on the weighty grounds of being contrary to Save Policy H9 and the interim policy on student accommodation and the proposed main modification to County Durham policy County Durham Plan Policy 16.3, which I repeat is required by the Inspector of the Examination Public for the county plan to be found sound. And the county plan has, in our view, reached a stage where it can be given appropriate weight, which is spelled out in paragraph 48 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Accordingly, the Parish Council urges you to stand by your carefully considered, up-to-date, formal position on extensions to HMOs and refuse this application. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that representation, Councillor Ashby. And as I previously mentioned, we were to have Mrs. Headley with us today. However, she has sent in some written representation. And if I can move across to you now, Ian, for you to read that representation out, please. If anybody can, everybody else can have their microphones on mute still, please. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Headley, representations are as follows. I'm aware that there will be a meeting this week concerning the proposed extension to 75 Winnie Hill. And although I will not be able to attend, I would like my point of view to be taken into consideration. At present, the property is home to 4 students and has been for the last several years. This has not been any cause for concern apart from the number of cars the household has recently had, which, if you know Winnie Hill, exacerbates the problem with parking, to the point where workmen to our property have to arrive by 7 AM to get a parking spot. I feel that possibly doubling the number of individuals may worsen this issue. Our properties are the only ones, as far as I'm aware, that share a yard. Again, the issues of refuse has not been an issue. We encourage our student neighbours to put any excess refuse into our bins if we have the room. This keeps the shared space tidy and hopefully vermin free. My concern is that the refuse created by possibly 10 people may not be manageable, especially if no extra bins are provided, which appears to be the case, for example, in the former prison officer flats. There doesn't seem to be any extra bins for each flat, and the excess rubbish is unsightly. Also, as we have this shared space, our kitchen windows and back doors face one another. The light into this space is limited most of the day. My concern is that if a 2-storey extension is added, this limited amount of daylight into our property will be further restricted. For the past several years, when we have had 4 student neighbours where noise has not been an issue, but again my concern is that with possibly up to 10 in residence, the noise level may increase, especially when they have visitors. Ours is a family home with extended family, including young grandchildren, visiting us on regular occasions and often staying over. Again, my concern may be that noise late at night when we have grandchildren sleeping at ours may be an issue, with the number of students in number 75 significantly increased. There are far more purpose-built student accommodations now in the city that I would have hoped that residential areas may have been saved from further development to keep a more balanced community. Also, where we have had a good relationship with our student neighbours and the former landlord, I fear this may be jeopardised if problems that have been absent then appear. Many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ian. That was very well read. Thank you very much for that, and very clear. So at this point, I'll go back to Lisa Marina. Lisa, is there anything that you'd like to clarify in those points that were made? Lisa, you're still on mute.
Apologies for that, Chair. Just a couple of things I'd like to pick up on. The comment in respect of the amount of students, it was just to reiterate and go back on that and say that it is a C4 use. It is remaining as a C4 use, and therefore the maximum number of residents they can have in there is 6, unless they do apply further for a change of use to a large HMO, which obviously this application is not for. Just a comment as well on the impact on the neighbour in respect of the brickwork of the extension. It projects by 3 metres at ground floor and then about approximately 1.2 at first floor. The 3 metre element at single storey could essentially be carried out under permitted development, and they would not require a formal application for that if it was only that aspect of it. So essentially the main element that does require the consent is the 1.2 element, which is not considered to have a significant impact on the neighbour. I think in respect of the HMO part, I'm going to defer to my colleague Graham Smith from the planning policy team to provide some further comments in respect of that. So I'll pass you over to Graham, and then I understand Neil Carter is also going to come in after that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Lisa. I'm picking that up, but thank you as well for everybody who's trying to help me out here. So Graham, yes, if you'd like to join the meeting now and introduce yourself, please. Well, do we have Graham here? I was under the impression Graham was going to be joining us today.
Hello, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, Graham, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Just working with the technology. Yes, my name's Graham Smith, and I am the policy team leader at Durham County Council. So I can just provide a bit of an update on the weight to the policy, which I think has been queried by John Ashby. So now I would say that although the County Durham plan is at an advanced stage of preparation, it's considered that no weight should be afforded to the County Durham plan in the decision-making process until the inspector's final report has been received on this. John Ashby referred to a main modification. However, we have a number of main modifications to the plan, and this is indeed part of the process. With the County Durham plan, we are in effect still in the examination process. All of these main modifications are currently subject to consultation until the 21st of July 2020. And at the end of this consultation period, the Council will forward these comments received along with the Council's comments to the inspector, and it'll be up to the inspector to consider the comments that have been put forward. Therefore, I think it's too soon to be giving any weight to any proposed main modification of the County Durham plan. In effect, these are still subject to consultation, and we wouldn't want to predetermine what might be the outcome of that consultation or any comments we may receive. In addition, it's up to the inspector to consider the proposed modifications in light of the comments received. I think what I would reiterate, Chair, I'd like to take this opportunity just to say from a policy perspective, the view is that the application should be determined in line with the statutory development plan, which is the saved policies of the City of Durham local plan. The interim policy was adopted by the Council in April 2016, and this is a material consideration to the decision-taking process. Although we've always been very clear, the weight should be afforded to this must be less than if it were part of the statutory adopted plan. So the Council's approach to considering extensions to HMOs has always been informed by an inspector's decision at 40 Hawthorne Terrace. In this appeal decision, the inspector made it very clear that the approach of the interim policy seemed to be at odds with the more permissive stance of the saved policy H9 of the City of Durham local plan. So for this reason, we would say that whilst the interim policy has weight, it's not part of the development plan. It's in conflict potentially with the development plan according to the inspector. Therefore, policy H9 must prevail in determining this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Graham. So Neil, we're going to come to you now, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a couple of points I want to emphasise. I mean, they've already been touched upon by the two previous officers who spoke, but in essence, I think it's important for members to just bear in mind that this is already a property that's in C4 use. So there isn't a change of use involved in what's proposed here. You're really just looking at the extensions, the built development that's being applied for. Secondly, and really just by way of emphasising what Graham Smith said, yes, there is a main modification, and John Ashby mentioned that. However, it's still out to consultation. I think our position is quite fully set out in paragraph 22 of the report. It's not part of the adopted development plan. Any adoption of the County Durham plan is quite some way off yet. So it's not something that we can really give any weight to at this point in time. Equally, the interim policy, which has been approved by the council, isn't part of the development plan. So again, we've always said that interim policy has to be afforded less weight than the local development plan, and specifically where there's any conflict between the interim policy and policies of the development plan, then the development plan has to prevail. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Neil. Lisa, is there anything else you'd like to come in with before I go to the committee?
If I could just ask, could we defer to John McGargle to talk about highways issues that have been raised as well, please?
If you think that'll be useful, we certainly will. So John, could you come in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. The question of is there enough adequate parking space within the area where the development is located? The development is within the city's controlled parking zone. Unlike the last application, the county council do have control over who parks within the area. The area is allocated for permit holders or people who pay and display to park in the area, because there are institutions such as the prison and other commercial demands for parking in the area. Parking in the area has always been quite contentious, and it's always been high in demand in that particular area. But we feel that, you know, the residents will not be permitted any further permits to park in the area. They can buy 2 permits to park in the area. That's not just within Winnie Hill, that's within a wider zone if they can't find space within Winnie Hill. And that costs £100 for those 2 parking permits. So if the students can afford that, they can buy 2 permits. If additional students come along and bring cars, so if we've got an additional 2 students there and they come along and bring a car, they have to then meet the pay and display charges. The pay and display charges are £24 a week, which you'd have to pay throughout the term. It may be that the students choose to do that, but we don't feel that would place a significant effect and have a significant harm in the area. It would place an extra competition for parking within Winnie Hill itself, but people can park just outside Winnie Hill, so we feel that there's no real issue with regards to parking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. So Lisa, are you happy to go over to the committee for debate now?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as I've mentioned, we are now over to the committee, and can anybody indicate if they'd like to speak, please? I don't seem to have anybody waiting to speak just at the moment. Councillor Shuttleworth, you've indicated. Councillor Shuttleworth? Yes, yeah, thank you.
Just going off where John said, where if Winnie Hill is swamped with cars and they can't get parked there, they're going to park on Holgart Street. And from time to time, there are buses, I think, still going up that street. So I think it's just creating a bigger problem for the residents of Durham City. And as I've said before, I mean, the residents who pay council tax are sick and tired of all these HMOs. Yes, you know, the students need to go to the university, but they've got halls of residents, and I think that should be adequate. And HMOs should be one of the last things we're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Maitland, I noticed you had a hand on the screen, so would you like to speak? You just need to unmute your microphone, Joyce.
Right, mine might seem a bit relevant. I mean, I know the parking's the issue now, but the neighbour, one of her main concerns was the rubbish and the bins and that. You know, will there be extra bin? And you know, like I said, I don't know if anybody can answer. Will there be extra bins for these extra tenants or things like that? Because it seems a big concern to neighbouring in the property. You know, it might just seem a little bit, but it could be a big issue for some people. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, could you answer that question, please?
I'm not aware, Chair, of the actual bin requirement for 6 residents in terms of what the requirement would be for that, but there is sufficient space for extra bins to be provided if it's needed in that respect.
Right, thank you. Yes, I do think there is, being a previous member of the Environment and Sustainability Committee, that there is if there's an upper limit of residents in a household, then there are extra bins provided. So, but yes, that could be looked into.
Yeah, I believe if there is 6 or more people in the property, they are able to provide to be able to ask for additional bins. So if it does go up to the 6, they would be able to, but they also would need to. But they also have the sufficient space to keep them as well if need be.
Yes, right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Councillor Taylor, I believe you would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, and thanks for your presentation as well, Lisa. once again, very professional, very informative, very helpful. Wow, 40%, nearly there, aren't we? Obviously, the county plan is still not ready, and the interim policy, what John Ashby, Councillor Ashby referred to, I have a lot of sympathy with what John said. So at 40%, it's not going to be long before Winnie Hill is lost as a residential area. Let's be honest about that. In the real world, anybody that travels to Winnie Hill now, does it comply with H9? Is there adequate parking? Do we feel that it's going to have an adverse effect on the rest of the community? Is it going to affect their amenity? The answers to those questions, I'm afraid, is no, there isn't adequate parking. There certainly isn't. Anybody that goes there today. Is it going to have an adverse effect? Well, of course it is. It's got to. That's the reality of the world we live in. So again, I'm very unhappy with this. We're creeping towards losing this as a residential area, and that's a real worry for me. 40% members, 40% now. How long before the County Durham plan's in place? Do we have the wherewithal to say enough's enough? I think perhaps we might on this one. I'll leave it at that for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Now, Councillor David Freeman, I have a message on my chat screen, so would you like to speak? Councillor Freeman?
Yes, sorry. The message that I'm trying to log on says I've left the meeting, but I'm still here.
Well, mine says you've joined the meeting actually, so that's nice.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so if you'd like to speak, it's your turn now. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, and I should have declared this on the last item, I am a member of Durham City Parish Council who have objected to, I think, all the applications today. I'm not on the planning committee and I haven't had any input in their objections. However, I do think that the response from Councillor Ashby from the Parish Council is quite damning of this application. And much as the report is well written, I feel that the responses we've had from the planning officers are again sort of appeasement to applicants of student property applicants. It seems quite clear that we can refuse this application, contrary to the report. As Councillor Taylor has mentioned, H9, Winnie Hill is a fairly narrow street. There certainly isn't the parking provision. Inevitably, residents will be affected by this. A permanent all year round resident lives next door to this property. But what I want to focus on is the interim policy. Under the interim policy, it is quite clear that this application breaches that policy. Now, I know that the planning officers have referred to an appeal that was lost in Hawthorne Terrace. More recently, two appeals were won in Providence Row. Hawthorne Terrace is not Winnie Hill. Winnie Hill, as we've heard, is still round about 60% residential. Hawthorne Terrace is probably 90% student. So I think that this is a defensible position to refuse this application. And as we've also heard from Councillor Ashby, this is where the County Council are going. We may not be able to put any weight on where we're going with the County Durham plan, but that is clearly our end destination, is that we're going to refuse these sorts of applications. We need to start refusing those applications today. We have the policies to do that. We will win an appeal, I'm sure, if the applicant makes an appeal, and therefore I would urge members to refuse this application. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I do have somebody else who's just registered to speak, but can I just confirm that you are moving a motion against approval of the application?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Okay. Councillor Coult, you'd like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Bev Court, Eschen Witten Ward. I would just particularly like to echo Councillor Taylor's words, to be honest with you, Chair. I think we need to be very mindful to the number of residents who live in that area, and particularly the expansion of the student population. And I would actually go with supporting Councillor Freeman's recommendation, if I may, Chair.
So can I note that you would second that?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
Chair, I would second that.
You'll second the motion to go against the officer's recommendation?
Yes, Chair, I would.
Yeah, I just need to make that absolutely clear.
Yeah.
Right. Do we have any other members who would like to speak? Do we have anybody else who would like to move a different motion?
Chair, can I just come back in on a couple of things, if that's okay?
Sorry, Lisa. Yes, of course you can. Of course you can.
Just in respect of Councillor Taylor's comment in respect of the 40%, that percentage will not change as a result of this application. The change of use is already there. It's an extension to it, and therefore the percentage won't increase in that respect. And just a comment in respect of appeals being won at Providence Row, there were 2 applications that were refused by committee. They are currently at appeal and have not yet been determined, so we don't have the outcome of those yet. A decision has not been made on them. I'd also like to go back to John, if that's okay, in respect of some additional info on the highway side. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Yes, it is pertinent that you mentioned that those applications haven't been determined at appeal yet, so thank you. John, would you like to come back in, please, John McGarrigle?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think just to make sort of my point quite clear here, Chair, that what we're talking about in terms of potential car ownership, if we have an additional 2 students at this property, if there's 100% car ownership, that's a potential 2 cars that will be owned within this area. There's no doubt that Winnie Hill is under stress with regards to parking. But they can park, and they're permitted to park with permits. They have access to 2 permits within a zone within that area, and we feel that there's enough space within that area to actually accommodate if there was a demand for 2 additional vehicles. The demand varies throughout the day as far as parking is concerned. So we feel that it could be accommodated within there. I also have quite a bit of concern about this because it is in a very accessible location. So, the likelihood of car ownership is much reduced when you've got such an accessible location. So I just think that needs to be borne in mind, Chair, if we're looking at a transport reason, in particular parking, for refusal of this application. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, John. I'd like to bring Neil Carter in now, our legal officer, before we go back to the committee. So, Neil, if you'd like to come in now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think what I'd like to do at this stage is just clarify with Councillor Freeman what exactly the reasons for refusal are that he's advancing, and then I'll perhaps comment on some of those after we've had that clarification.
I do have another councillor who's indicated they'd like to speak, but if you'd like to explore those reasons with Councillor Freeman first, we may have a different outcome. So, Councillor Freeman, are you in a position to engage with what Neil's just suggested there and sort of expand on your reasons for refusing the application?
Yeah, the application should be refused because it's contrary to H9 and H13 and contrary to the Council's interim policy on student accommodation. It's obviously contrary to the interim policy because there are more than 10% of properties in the street already which are HMOs, so it's obviously that's contrary to that. And H9, which is multiple occupation student households, that such properties or buildings do not adversely affect the character of the area and do not require significant extensions or alterations. Well, clearly this is an extension and it will significantly affect the character of the area. And H13 again is impact upon character and amenity. And further students in an area, even though obviously the house is already an HMO, will have a significant adverse effect on the character and appearance of the area. And as we've heard already, it's 40% occupancy of HMOs at the moment. Further students, even if not actually adding to the percentage figure of HMOs, will have a further detrimental effect on Winnie Hill.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. So Neil, would you like to comment on those reasons?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I do have some concerns about the reliance on the conflict with the interim policy, given the quite clear guidance that we've had on a previous appeal decision on how we ought to be interpreting that. Obviously, the issue of impacts on character of the area and amenity are essentially subjective judgment issues. I think I'd be more comfortable with refusal reasons which relate specifically to those impacts rather than any reliance on a conflict with the interim policy.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Freeman, would you like to respond to what Neil said there, or are you happy to stick with what you've said?
I am happy to stick with what I've said. I do acknowledge what Neil's saying, but I think the key thing for me is the interim policy. I think the H19 and H13 can be justified, but ultimately I do acknowledge we're talking about 1 or 2 extra students. Although, of course, 1 or 2 extra students has been the drip effect throughout the city, which has resulted in hundreds of extra students. So, you know, even 1 or 2 does have an effect overall. But you know, I think it's the interim policy that we should be focusing on, and ignoring an appeal that was made elsewhere in the city under different circumstances, with a much higher percentage of HMOs in the street where the appeal was lost.
That's all right. I just wanted to come back in case you'd thought of anything else, because I know it's a bit difficult when you, you know, on the spot like that. Councillor Taylor, you indicated that you'd like to speak earlier. So can you come in now, please?
I did, yeah. Thank you so much. Certainly have some sympathy with what Neil Carter said there. In fact, he's quite right in what he's saying about the interim policy, but it does give us an indicator where this council's going or where it would like to be. Lisa's point on the 40%, okay, 40% is too much. And that's where we're starting from. Drip, drip. We're not going to go back over it. It's going to go more than 40%. H9, Chair, this is my judgment. Is there adequate parking? No, there's not adequate parking. Doesn't meet the H9. Will it have a detrimental adverse effect on the rest of the community? My judgment is yes, it will. It does not accord with the H9. And it will have a detrimental effect on the amenity of other residents, if I can say it. Doesn't meet with H9. That is my judgment. And I stick by that and support Councillor Freeman, what he said on that. And I think that's all I've got to say, Chair. I think we have the reasons. They're fully justifiable. The policies are there. And, you know, let's hurry up with the new stuff that's coming through, because we need it badly. 40% is almost a community lost once again. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Taylor. So we do have a motion on the table to refuse the officer's decision on this application. Do we have any alternative motions from any members? Is there a motion coming forward to support the officer's decision? No. So, right, I'm satisfied that we'll go to the vote now. So, Neil, if you can do similar to you did previously, and we'll do a roll call of all the councillors for so what we're actually voting for here, councillors, is to refuse the officer's recommendation. So, in effect, you're refusing the ability for this extension to be built. So, just to be clear. Thank you, Neil. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to clarify, so this is a vote for refusal of the application for the reasons that were put forward by Councillor Freeman. So I'll go to Councillor Brown first. Are you for or against? Councillor Brown?
Sorry, other day. I support the officer's recommendations, and therefore I presume I'm against the motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Malcolm Clark?
I support the motion.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're for this motion to refuse?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Corrigan, are you for or against?
I'm for the motion to refuse.
Okay. Councillor Colt, are you for or against?
I'm for the motion to refuse.
Okay. Councillor Davidson, are you for or against this motion?
Against.
Okay. Councillor Freeman, are you for or against?
I'm for the motion to refuse.
Okay. Councillor Gardner, are you for or against?
I'm with Councillor Freeman. I'm for the motion.
Councillor Lang, are you for or against?
Against.
Okay. And Councillor Maitland, are you for or against?
Against.
Councillor Robinson, are you for or against?
Against.
Councillor Shuttleworth, are you for or against? Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yeah, sorry, I'm with for the motion to refuse.
Okay. And finally, Councillor Taylor, are you for or against?
Well, given what I've said, Neil, I'm certainly for. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, I make that 7 votes to 5.
Yes, me too, Neil. So thank you very much for that, committee. That was a very interesting debate we had there, very full debate. But I can announce that the decision was to go against the officer's recommendation, so therefore to refuse this planning application, and the vote was from 7 to 5. So thank you, committee, for that. Again, I will mention to the speakers, if you'd wish to leave the meeting now, thank you very much for your contributions. If you'd like to stay, then you're perfectly able to stay. It's a public meeting. We are going to now move on to the last item on the agenda, which is item 5C. This is 11 Mareswell Close in Durham, and this is to consider a certificate of lawful use application for the change of use of a C3 dwelling house to a C4 HMO prior to Article 4 direction coming into force. And this application is going to be read out to us and discussed by Sarah Eldridge. Sarah, can you come in now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just load up the presentation.
Yes, and I think really because we're not used to dealing with these types of things, if you can just give us a little précis of exactly what we're doing here today before we start, that would be useful.
Absolutely. So I do actually have that covered in the presentation. So I'll come on to how this is different from a normal planning application as part of running through that. Just before I start that presentation, I do have a couple of corrections to make to the report, if that's okay. So I'll quickly run through those. Yeah. So there's multiple references within the report to the Article 4 direction and the date that came into effect. And members may have noticed that on occasion we refer to it on the 16th and on the 17th. So just to correct, the Article 4 direction actually took effect on the 17th of September. The 16th of September is therefore the date by which any use needed to be established to avoid needing planning permission under that Article 4 direction. Couple of other alterations. So this is in relation to the evidence. So at paragraph 30, we refer to tenants moving into the property on the 7th of September. That should actually read 2, not 3. So it was the 2 additional tenants moved into the property on the 7th of September. And consequently then at paragraph 31, we should be referring to 4, not 5. And then also at paragraph 31, we refer to statutory declarations from tenants. That's actually incorrect. We received emails from former tenants as part of the applicant's statutory declaration, so they formed part of the applicant's submission in that respect. So I'll move on to the presentation then. Hopefully that those corrections don't have people too confused.
Thank you, Sarah.
So the application is for a certificate of lawful use for change of use of a C3 dwelling to a C4 HMO. and they seek to confirm that the use is lawful because it commenced prior to the Article 4 direction coming into effect, which was on the 17th of September. So just for a bit of context on this slide here, you can see where the site's located, both on site location plan and on aerial photograph. And then just a photograph of that property in the context of Mareswell Close. It's the one central to the picture with the solar or photovoltaic panels on the roof. So as you've probably picked up from the report, this isn't a usual planning application that we're dealing with here. It's an application for a lawful development certificate. So what the applicant's seeking is a legal document which effectively confirms that the use of that property is lawful. It's not a planning permission. We can't put conditions on it. We're not considering the planning merits of the use or its compliance with policy. The issuing of a certificate depends entirely on factual evidence about the use, and the responsibility is actually with the applicant to provide evidence to support that application. If, as local planning authority, we're satisfied on the balance of probabilities that the appropriate tests have been met, we need to issue a lawful development certificate for that use. So as part of the consideration of the application, we do a consultation exercise, and again, different from a planning application, this isn't statutory consultation. The local authority chose to do consultation. And the reason behind that is to allow any third parties to submit their own evidence related to the lawfulness of the use that we can then take into consideration when we're doing our assessment. So as a response to that public consultation, we received an objection from the City of Durham Parish Council on the basis that they've been informed that the use of the property actually didn't come into force until after the 4 direction. They understand that the students moved in just before the Michaelmas term, which would be in the October. We also received correspondence from neighbouring properties. We had 3 letters in. And their objections were on a number of reasons. The first one was that the property wasn't occupied until after the Article 4 was in place. And then subsequent points raised by objectors are not relevant to the determination of the lawful development certificate. So the fact that they've only had planning permission for an extension, not a change of use, that the community are already suffering as a result of having HMO properties in the area, and the reference to the percentage threshold are not things that we can consider as part of this application. We are not considering the merits of an HMO. So the applicant, in submitting their application, they've stated that the property has been used as an HMO since before the Article 4 direction, which came into effect on the 17th of September. And they support their case with various evidence, principally comprising sworn declaration, information from tenants, tenancy contracts, and then a planning contravention notice. So that was something that we as local authority had served on the applicant as part of an enforcement investigation into an HMO use. So when we've looked at that evidence, I think what's clear to officers in consideration is that the current owners bought the property in December 2015. They then subsequently had planning permission for a rear extension that was approved in June 2016 and subsequently built. The applicant confirms that they bought the property in 2015 as part of their statutory declaration, and then that the property was furnished and habitable by July 2016. In relation to the occupancy of the property, the applicant tells us that the tenants received the keys on 20th of July 2016, and that 2 of the tenants then moved in on the 6th of August. 2 tenants wouldn't trip the it sort of breach the tipping point into what would be a C4 use. So at that point, with 2 tenants in the property, it would still have been in a C3 use. What they then go on to tell us is that 2 additional tenants moved into the property on the 7th of September, and at that point is when the use would change to become a C4 HMO. And the 17th of September is clearly before the 17th of September date when the Article 4 took effect. There was then a 5th and final tenant that moved into the property in the first week of October. That would have been after the Article 4. As part of officers' prior involvement in the property, we did have a planning officer went out on the 2nd of September 2016, and this was in a response to an enforcement complaint that the extension was built incorrectly. And their note in relation to that site visit was that no change of use had occurred at that time, but the 2nd of September again predates the date of the 7th of September when we've been told the 3rd and 4th tenants moved into the property. We also understand that the property has been registered exempt from council tax under a Class N exemption since the 1st of July 2016. So I think as a bit of a summary, the local authority don't have any evidence of our own to contradict or undermine the applicant's evidence. And whilst we do have objections to the application from both neighbours and the parish council, we don't consider that has really been substantiated through the provision of evidence. We need to give considerable weight to the statutory declaration that's been provided by the applicant in terms of our consideration on the balance of probabilities. So it's officer's conclusion then that on the balance of probability, the property was in use as a C4 HMO on the 7th of September, which is prior to the Article 4 direction coming into effect, and that use is therefore lawful. And therefore officers are recommending that the lawful use certificate is issued. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that information, Sarah. I hope that makes things quite a bit clearer for the committee in what we need to do now and the way forward. We do have 4 registered speakers on this item today, and I do know that these people are present. We saw them join the meeting earlier on this morning. I'm going to start with Councillor Roger Cornwell from the City of Durham Parish Council, please, and then I'll move on to the other speakers. So, Councillor Cornwell, could you give your representation now, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is an extraordinary case, and it's quite unprecedented in my experience of planning applications in the City of Durham, and that stretches back for more than 20 years, as members here may be aware. The officer's recommendation is based on documents that were not on the planning portal until yesterday afternoon. The Parish Council was only furnished with copies of the missing documents on Tuesday afternoon and on Wednesday. An amended application form was only uploaded yesterday morning. This is the original planning application form. This shows the original application form. As you can see in box 7, the applicant has said in answer to the question, when was the use or activity begun or the building work substantially completed? The answer given is the 9th of December 2015. This is manifestly not true. The Parish Council pointed this out in October. All of the objections from the Parish Council and from the neighbours have been placed on, based on this misleading information, and all of these objections were uploaded to the planning portal either on the day or within a couple of days of them being submitted to the council. The supporting information from the applicants has been withheld from the portal until the eve of this meeting. If you can come back to the webcam, please, Sarah. Thanks. Sorry, can you, this comes up a little later. Okay, the Parish Council is well aware of the tests to be applied in these cases. We actually supported the County Council in opposing an earlier application elsewhere in the city. There, the applicant was claiming, as in here, a C4 use that commenced before the Article 4 declaration came into force. The inspector dismissed that appeal and made it very clear that the key date was when students took up occupation in the renovated building and not when their leases started. So the parish council is very clear about the issues involved. We're not going to bring up any planning policies this morning. At the time the parish council lodged its first objection, all we knew of the applicant's case was that the C4 use was claimed to have begun just 2 days after they bought the house. Neighbours had informed us that nobody had moved in, the house had been gutted and reconfigured, so there was no actual evidence, simply an unsubstantiated assertion on the application form, and that was clearly wrong. Then we learned the officers had asked the neighbours to provide sworn affidavits. This is unprecedented in my experience, and such a departure from the usual practice that the parish council planning committee decided to call it to this committee. Is it appropriate for innocent neighbours faced with an unwelcome proposal next door to be asked to go to the expense and trouble of making a statutory declaration? If you can just pull up the second slide now, please. Next one. Yep. In April of this year, we investigated further and found an aerial photograph which shows building materials plied in the front garden. This was taken for the Ordnance Survey on the 6th of May 2016, well after the date was then being claimed as the use coming into force. And we forward this in a further submission along with a relevant and a local appeal decision. Okay, if you can flip back to the webcam, that'd be good, thank you. Although we'd learned that there was further material, presumably including sworn statements, it was only on reading the officer's report that we learned what they were. We then asked that these be made available to the parish council, ideally by being put on the portal. They were in fact emailed to us on Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday. That's this week. There are 9 documents and they amount to 88 megabytes of data. They do include a sworn statement. This is headed strictly private and confidential. It's been so redacted that I do not know who made it, but presumably either the applicant or her partner. The name of the solicitor has been redacted, and I don't know why that's been done. It is dated the 27th of November 2019, which is 7 months ago. The key dates claimed in these latest documents have been contradicted by representations from the neighbours. I found those convincing, and I believe they're going to be speaking to you a little later. I would like very much the opportunity to discuss these latest documents with them. It may be that when you hear them, you'll think their evidence outweighs what has been put. But if you don't, I mean, these statements have been put together in an incredibly short time span. I have not been able to discuss these documents with the neighbours within the time available. The agenda for this committee is published a week in advance, and that's for a very good reason. Now, every document in support of this application has either been substituted or has been uploaded for the first time within the past 24 hours. Don't be fooled by the date of the 3rd of October. That just compounds the matter. You wouldn't have been able to see any of these documents until yesterday morning or yesterday lunchtime. If they have been available as long as last October, why haven't they been available? What the parish council is asking you to do, I mean, I rather hope that you'll listen to the neighbours and find against the applicant, But perhaps more realistically, I think you now need to defer a decision on this matter in the interest of fairness, so that we, and indeed you, will have an opportunity to study these documents. So that is the Parish Council's position. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for that, Councillor Cornwall. We do have other people to speak, but I think at this point I'll perhaps go back to Sarah and Neil to ask a bit of advice on whether you think we should proceed at this point. Neil, perhaps I'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a number of points that I can make in response to what Mr. Cornwall said. I think probably the best thing to do is firstly acknowledge that this is a type of application which is not usually before members. It's an application that seeks a certificate about the lawfulness of a use. It's not a planning application. Therefore, it's not about planning merits. It's essentially an issue of weighing up evidence and making a decision which is a mixed question of fact and law. So it's completely and utterly different to a planning application. Now that has some knock-on consequences. So firstly, there's no obligation on the council to consult because it's not a planning application. If we choose to consult, the reason we consult is to canvass any evidence from third parties which we think is relevant in order to be weighed up in the balance. So that's the purpose of consultation. Secondly, the supporting evidence that is submitted as part of the application is not required to be on the portal and to be open to public inspection. It's predominantly given to us in confidence. I think it's right, and if I'm wrong on this, I'm sure Sarah will come in due course, but I think it's right that the Parish Council did previously request this information. We did go to the applicant and ask if we could release it, and at that stage he didn't give us consent to do so. So that's why we couldn't release that information previously. The reason that it's been released to the Parish Council quite close to the date of this hearing is because we're now able to do so under slightly different procedures because of the report that's been published. Prior to the publication of the report, we couldn't release that information. However, what I would say is that in my view, the information that's in the report, which summarises both the applicant's evidence and the evidence from the objectors and weighs up that evidence, is clear enough, in my opinion, to enable any objector, such as the Parish Council or members of the public, to understand what the issues are, what the main issues are, and what information or evidence is relevant. So I don't think I could agree with what with Mr. Cornwall said, insofar as he suggests that anyone's been prejudiced by the late disclosure of this information. I think everything of relevance really was in the report, and I'm sure the Parish Council had interactions with the planning officer before that. So I don't see at this stage any clear reason why the application should be deferred. I'm not really sure what would be achieved by deferment. We would say, as officers, all of the relevant information is before you. It's summarised in the report, so I'm really not sure what a deferment would achieve in this particular case. And I'll hand over to Sarah if she wants to add anything to that.
Thanks, Neil. Yes, please, Sarah, if you'd like to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add one thing, I think, which is the relevance or otherwise of this change in the date. So the fact that the original application was submitted with a December 2015 date that was then subsequently changed to 7th of September 2016. I think Councillor Cornwall is correct. It was identified relatively early on that the application form cited a date which reflected the date the property was purchased, and the agent for the application confirmed to us that that was a mistake. And that was only rectified as part of the preparations for committee in terms of the receipt of an additional an amended application form. But I don't believe that change in date is really pivotal to the matter that we're considering, which is whether or not the student tenants were in occupation prior to the Article 4 direction taking effect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think that looks as though we're going to proceed, and I will bring in the speakers, as is the normal process. So back to the list of speakers, and the next speaker is Mr. Holmes. So Mr. Holmes, if you can indicate that you are with us, I believe I have seen you. Yes. You're on. Yep, thank you. Now, Mr. Holmes, you will be sharing the 5 minutes allotted. So you actually have 2.5 minutes to present your case. And as usual, the committee clerk will inform you when you have 1 minute left to speak, if you don't mind, if there's a little bit of an interruption there. So if I can ask you to unmute your microphone and give us your representation now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I be heard?
I can hear you, so I'm assuming, and everybody else is nodding, so yes, thank you.
I'm Norman Holmes, as you said, together with my partner Janet George of 12 Maresville Close, and speaking on behalf of Mr. Bill Williamson of number 10 Maresville Close at his request. I wish to object to the change of use, or the licence as you call it. We're splitting the allotted time between us, as if we may. The planning officer, Ms. Hurden, asked that residents offer evidence should swear an affidavit. We are both qualified senior health professionals, have worked in the health service for 68 years between us. We have been governed by professional scrutiny, by criminal record checks throughout. We are not given to lying, fabricating evidence, or behaving dishonestly. The onus is on the applicant to provide clear evidence in support of this application, not us. The applicant, until very recently, wrongly claimed that the house was used as an HMO from December 2015, a fact now disproved in an amended form submitted yesterday. From December 2015 until after the regulation change, the house was gutted, completely renovated, and the ground floor partitioned into 3 bedrooms. The single-storey side extension needed substantial structural work due to significant subsidence and had detached from the original gable end. The said extension runs the entire length and parallel to our gable at less than a meter's distance. I'm very aware of the situation. I went to the extent of lending the workmen some of my tools. I know the main workman by name. Bill Free Homes did not get involved in management of the property until 2017. The first year it was managed by the couple who own it. We saw no occupation of the house until the 20th of September 2016. That's the 20th of September 2016. That is after the regulation change date. Apart from one evening when there was some people sitting outside number 11, we spoke to the said workman the following day, and he told us that the owner was angry and that they should not have been there as the property was not ready. Residents of this cul-de-sac of 5 houses are all retired. We spend our time in the street. No one can occupy a house here and not be noticed. We did not observe any occupation of number 11 other than that we have mentioned. We urge the planning committee to reject the application today. The owners of the property can easily and profitably let the house to a family. Janet?
Shall I continue?
I'll just thank Mr. Holmes for that representation, please. So yes, it's Ms. George. I'm sorry, I don't know your Christian name.
Janet.
Right, Janet. So if you'd like to come in now and add your 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. We have both been qualified and registered health professionals virtually all our working lives, working with vulnerable patients and relatives. Never once in my entire career have I been asked to swear an affidavit. All I can say to you is that because of the proximity of the property, we are aware of any activity in it. We can hear occupants, see and hear if people come and go, notice bins or cars arriving. We can hear talking and music from inside the house, particularly if a window is open, and most definitely from the outside of the house, such as a door shutting or a car pulling up. We did not see or hear any signs of residential occupation prior to the change date of the 17th of September. My professional codes require me to adhere to high standards both during and outside my work time. I found the request for a sworn affidavit astonishing and replied to Ms Hurton with the following email, 8th of the 11th, 19. Dear Michelle, I'm not sure what a sworn affidavit requires, but I can absolutely swear that there was no one living in 11 Mareswell Close from the 9th of the 12th, 15th, as stated on the application on the planning portal. The property was bought, then gutted and completely uninhabitable. End of email. To add further to dates, during that spring, the owner requested to come onto my property in order to remove part of a shared fence so he could access his side extension. I told him he would have to wait as we had a robin nesting on eggs on the fence. The owner came onto my land and pulled some of the fence panels down in front of me, despite me saying no to him. It happened too quickly to stop him. The committee report states that a building officer visited on the 2nd of September and stated that the property did not appear to be occupied. This is despite emails stating students were there in August. We were away the 7th to the 14th of September. I first saw one person only on the 20th of September, and that is recorded in my diary. From our return on the 14th and past the date of the 17th, and despite living so close, we saw or heard no signs of occupation. I also have a diary entry of rendering being done on the 18th of September. And in the interests of the healthy, balanced communities, we urge you to reject this application because speaking as a city resident, I can say that having another permanently registered student HMO will have a detrimental effect on the residents. And this is a quiet cul-de-sac. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Janet. Now, there are a couple of councillors who've registered an interest to speak, but I will have to ask you to be patient and wait until we've finished listening to all the speakers this afternoon, and then I will bring you in turn. So at this point, we go across to the applicant. So Mr. Ridley, could you speak up and let us be aware that you're here, Mr. Ridley?
Hello, Madam Chair.
Hello, Mr. Ridley. Now you actually have.
Hello.
You have up to 5 minutes if you so wish to choose to take the 5 minutes, but the officer will come in a minute before, so at 4 minutes point, just to remind you. So if you can go ahead now with your representation, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant as his planning consultant at this committee. I'd also like to thank Sarah for a very rounded summary of the case and very good advice from Neil Carter, particularly as this is such an unusual application to come before the committee. The council didn't compel the applicant to make this application through any enforcement investigation. Indeed, an early enforcement investigation into the alleged unauthorised material change of use of the property concluded that the applicant lawfully implemented the change to a small HMO through permitted development rights. The applicant made his application to get the paperwork in place following the council's Article 4 direction coming into effect. Such paperwork would make conveyance procedures easier by demonstrating the current use is lawful should he ever wish to dispose of his interest in the property. The applicant has carefully considered the letters of objection to his application and is mindful that the thrust of the objections relates to the planning merits of the use, which is irrelevant to the consideration of this application, as officers have informed in both in commenting today and in their reports. Views expressed by third parties on planning merits of the case, or on whether he has any private rights to carry out the use in question, are totally irrelevant when determining this application. For instance, considering development against the thresholds of interim HMO policy would be wholly improper. The issue of this certificate relies on factual evidence alone. It is the applicant's responsibility to provide the necessary evidence to support the application, and in my opinion, he had discharged his obligations by providing sufficiently precise information that shows the C4 use of the property commenced before the Articles 4 direction came into effect. Unlike objectors, the applicant has provided a statutory declaration, and I am concerned why it would be deemed improper to do so. to be honest with you. And it is noted objectors do not provide any dates to support their assertions. Accordingly, as officers pointed out, these assertions must carry less weight. The change of use of the dwelling to a Class C4 small HMO did not require the express permission of the council as local planning authority. The change of use was permitted by the General Permitted Development Order as amended. And the government guides the council in considering lawful development certificates in a document titled Lawful Development Certificates. It states if a local planning authority has no evidence of itself, nor from any others, to contradict or otherwise make the applicant's version of events less than probable, there is no good reason to refuse the application, provided the applicant's evidence alone is sufficiently precise and unambiguous to justify the grant of a certificate, and this is the key, on the balance of probability. I contend that the assertions of objectors, again carrying less weight, do not constitute evidence that makes the applicant's versions of events less than. Whether the applicant was undertaking works in respect to planning or building regulation processes at the property is not a determinant factor in isolation. That would merely point out and give indications of an applicant undertaking work at the property and does not provide evidence that the property was unoccupied. Both the applicant and officers contend the property was legally brought into use as a small HMO on the 7th of September 2016 and before the Article 4 direction came into effect. Accordingly, I respectfully suggest that there are no reasonable grounds to refuse this application. On the balance of probability, the test here, a certificate can be granted by the council. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for that information, Mr. Ridley. Now, before I do go to the committee, one of the committee members has indicated they would like to ask a question of Neil, but I'm going to go straight to Neil now and bring Neil in, so you can perhaps preempt some of the questions that are going to be asked shortly. So Neil, I'll bring you in now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth just answering the issue of why the planning officer requested the objectors to make a statutory declaration or other type of sworn statement, because it seems to have caused some offence to the objectors and some consternation. I mean, I'll make it absolutely clear that the authority is not questioning the integrity of the objectors. Really, the reason that was requested was to put their evidence on a level playing field with the applicant's evidence. So it's quite common for these types of applications to be supported by a sworn statement, usually in the form of a statutory declaration. There's a bit of confusion about terminology. Sometimes we're talking about, is it a sworn statement? Sometimes we're talking about a statutory declaration. Other times we're talking about affidavits. For the present purposes, there's no real distinction between any of those things. They're all just types of statement given under oath. And so that's why the planning officer was asking for that, because without that, we feel that we can't give the same weight to the objector's evidence as we can to the applicant's evidence. So that's the background to that. Now, I think the other thing to note here is that clearly the crucial issue as to whether the existing use as an HMO is lawful is the date upon which that use was commenced. So the applicant, I believe, in his evidence says it was commenced on the 7th of September 2016. You've heard from the objectors. They've said today that they didn't see anybody in occupation until the 20th. So that's the conflicting evidence that you've got in which you have to assess. I'm happy to answer any further questions which members might have on this.
Thank you, Neil. I will need to revert back to the list of speakers, and I believe one of the councillors may come back to you, but I'll take the councillors in order of indication. And so first was Councillor Malcolm Clark. So Malcolm, if you would like to speak now, please.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Malcolm Clark representing Delves Lane, a substitute member for today's meeting. This one was quite a difficult one for me because obviously having not sat in many planning meetings because I'm blessed with being a member of licensing instead, this, when I read it, seemed very close to making legal determinations or what could be classed as needing to sort of unpick things as to where we stand legally. So I found all of the representations from objectors, from the representative of the applicant to be very, very useful. The objectors, I think, obviously were a little bit distracted by the issue of the affidavit, which thankfully they didn't use all of a lot of time to discuss. But what they did say was basically that there was not a specific tenancy, if I've got it right. So the Article 4 direction would have come into place prior to any new tenancy start, which would be against the rules. I found it interesting that there was a tenancy agreement submitted as part of the evidence that showed the initial 2 tenants, if I'm right. If I get any of this wrong, I apologise, and I'm sure the officer can correct me. But what I note that is missing, which I think will be highly significant because we're obviously dealing in facts, and obviously we ultimately determine this based on facts. And there's no subsequent tenancy agreement submitted that would clarify 100% when the second portion of the tenancy, when the additional tenants turned up. Now, you know, I'm not a mind reader. That can be that it's existed and not submitted. It could be that it doesn't exist and they're trying to pull a flanker. Who knows? But I think it's significant to me that there's no further evidence to say categorically that would, and I'm not doubting, you know, the integrity of an objector, but it would certainly provide a judgment call for us in terms of how we deal with it. Because at the moment, there's nothing to say when those tenants came in. There's sworn affidavits to say they weren't there at that point. And that to me is where the confusion comes in. Legally, you know, the applicant's representatives put a number of things forward that would kind of hamstring us in a way from making a decision based on what we think. But I think it is significant, Chair. I'll finish on the point to say there's no second tenancy agreement. There must have been something there, because if they don't pay their rent, you've got very little chance of getting it in court if there's no tenancy agreement. So given the fact they had a tenancy agreement at the start, I can only presume there was something there that would give us a date, and I question, to be honest, why that wasn't submitted. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Well, I'm going to go over to Sarah now to see if there's anything that you'd like to add or enlighten us on that particular point, Sarah. So if I can bring you in now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to come back on the issue of tenancy agreements, they're probably a little bit of a red herring, to be honest with you, because the existence of the tenancy agreement doesn't actually tell us when the property was occupied by those tenants, just that they'd signed the agreement. However, I think to clarify the position in this case, it was a joint tenancy, and that does actually form part of the submitted evidence. That tenancy itself commenced on the 1st of July. So the tenancy agreement, the contracts were signed as from the 1st of July, and that ran through until the 30th of June the following year. But for the purposes of lawfulness of use, what we're interested in is the date that those individuals that signed up to that tenancy agreement then took occupation. And what's come through from the evidence from the applicants is that 2 of them, if you just bear with me a second, let me get my dates back. 2 of them moved in on the 6th of August 2016, and then 2 more moved in on the 7th of September, and then the 5th one moved in on an unspecified date in October. So the crux date for us is the date that those 3rd and 4th tenants moved in, which the applicant has told us in their statutory declaration took place on the 7th of September. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that clears up a few points there with the date issues. Now, the second person who indicated they'd like to speak was Councillor Alan Gardner. Councillor Gardner, do you still have a question outstanding, or were your questions answered earlier on? Would you like to speak now?
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Alan Gardner from the Tudor Division. Yes, just a few things still outstanding, and it's really down to residential occupancy. Ordinarily, it's my experience that students will look for their properties in and around the sort of Michaelmas term and sign contracts in Epiphany, which is shortly after Christmas, January, February time. But they will normally have keys and able to move into a property in July, as the applicant stated. So there's no problems there at all. It's also quite common that you'll see students go into football training, rowing, hockey, and all the other sports as well, or ambassador stuff around the university from August, September time. So again, that's in line with what the applicant said. But Neil, this is the one that actually matters. For residential occupancy, what would be classed legally as when a residence takes occupancy? Is it from the fact that they get the contract? Is it from the keys? Is it from moving property into the property? Because we've actually got people moving in for October and moving into properties now, but they're not moving in, but some of their belongings are moving in. Or is it from the time that they actually open the front door and decide to stay there? If you could clarify which of them four actually matters, then it will probably help people to sort of say, you know, the balance of probability from my point of view looks at the moment as though the applicant is pretty much exactly what they would say, and that's the normal way that the student lifestyle goes. But if you can just confirm that, Neil, it would be appreciated. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. So, Neil, yes, I think that question has been put to you, which would enlighten quite a lot of the committee if you're able to respond. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the answer is it's physical occupancy that matters. So it'll be when the students actually move in and start living there. So it's not when they just move some belongings in, they would have to be actually living there.
Thank you, Neil. So the next councillor I have listed to speak is Councillor Paul Taylor. Paul, would you like to come in now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Balance of probabilities and such like. I think we, as committee members, I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I'm particularly uncomfortable with this. I really am. There's areas of it I'm not qualified to speak on, quite frankly. The legalities and other parties are being mentioned, which I'm uncomfortable with as well, because we don't know if that's the case. Well, in such instances, I think what we need to try and do is to simplify things here. And if what I'm about to say is ridiculous, then I do apologise. I understand where the applicant's coming from. He wants to avoid the Article 4. I understand where Mr. Holmes and Janet George is coming from. They don't want this in its entirety. They don't want this. I understand that. Is it beyond the realms of possibility that the people that actually took up occupancy can give a statement? The applicant obviously knows who they are. Is that ridiculous? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think I'm not sure whether Sarah or Neil, who would be best placed to answer that.
Chair, I'll come in on that. My understanding is that the applicant's evidence, or his sworn evidence, includes emails with the tenants who were in occupation, which confirm individually when they arrived in terms of occupation. So I think that point is already covered. Whilst their evidence, that is of the tenants themselves, is not on a sworn basis, it is included in a sworn statement given by the applicant.
I believe it's actually in paragraph 26, Neil. It's one of the bullet points, actually, that the Word document with extracts from emails sent from the students stating when they occupied the property.
But
so
that doesn't answer, with respect, Chair, that does not answer my question.
No.
We have emails, we do not have a sworn statement from, which will really put them on the onus on them, you know, and I'll say it to tell us the truth, if you like.
Yeah. I understand completely where you're coming from, Councillor Taylor, because it's a similar requirement as was required of Mr. Holmes and Janet George there. So Sarah, I'm going to push that one to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's a relatively tricky point, to be honest with you. Tenants, obviously, 4 years prior have probably long since left Durham. we can't sort of compel them to provide sworn declaration, and I'm sure the applicant's agent is in this at the moment, participating in the meeting, and I'm sure we'll be noting that point. But I don't think it's something that we can compel the applicant to provide. Essentially, I mean, it all boils down to the weight of the evidence that we actually have at the moment, and the difficulty of that is that we have relatively heavily weighted evidence from the applicant in the form of a sworn declaration, and then we have other slightly vaguer evidence from objectors. I mean, we've heard a date there today that hasn't been presented previously in written correspondence in relation to the 20th of September, but it's still relatively non-specific about the number of tenants that might have been seen on that date, etc. So it really is a matter of balancing the evidence that we have before us at present, I think.
Right. Neil, I think you've indicated you'd like to come back in.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer Councillor Paul Taylor's question just a bit more directly, I suppose. Our assessment is it's not necessary for the tenants to actually give sworn statements on this. The sworn statement comes from the applicant. He's referred to the date when the tenants moved in, so that's the key part of the evidence. He's provided the emails from the tenants really just by way of corroboration of what he's saying, but his is the key evidence that's given under oath. I think that's probably all I want to say on that.
Thank you, Neil. That does clarify, though, that particular point, and so thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Taylor, because I'm sure there were other committee members who were wondering that exact point. Councillor Clark, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I wondered if somebody could clarify what is deemed as moving in. Because it seems to me there's a large grey area here. I know you're talking about sworn statements. We've definitely got sworn affidavits to say that people were there at a certain date, and that forms the basis of their objection, to be fair. So I'm very nervous that I would vote in such a way that would effectively tell them that wasn't right. I'm very nervous about that. So I'm just as a bit of a silly example, I suppose, is that if the tenants were to come to Durham from wherever they were coming from, and they moved, one cup into cupboard, and then decided for whatever reason they're going to stay somewhere else for 3 days, have they moved in then or in 3 days? So it seems a huge grey area here for me. I'm very uncomfortable about where this is headed, that I'm effectively going to be going against by voting on this, one sworn affidavit over another, and I'm really uncomfortable with that, Chair.
Councillor Clark, I think that question was already answered earlier on. Actually, it was actually raised earlier on, but if people are still a little bit unclear, I will ask for it to be clarified again, and I believe it was you that gave the answer, Neil. So would you like to repeat what you'd mentioned before about the definition of moving in?
Chair, it's not an exact science. I mean, I'll hand over to Sarah in a moment because I think she wants to say something about it. But really, to my mind, it would be when there is physical occupation of the property. So when you've moved your belongings in and you're actually living there, taking your meals in the property, sleeping there, that sort of thing. Now, clearly, there could be situations where that is only on a temporary basis, but I don't think that's the situation we've got here. The evidence is they moved in permanently on the 7th of September. That's the evidence that the applicant has provided to us.
Thank you, Neil. So as suggested, I'll come across to you now, Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think just to clarify, and if I may quote directly from the sworn declaration provided by the applicant, this might provide some comfort to members in that respect. So they do actually say that they can attest to the fact that the house was occupied. So this is on the 7th of September, in the sense that 4 tenants were eating, sleeping, washing and living at the property. So I think they do go as far as saying in their sworn declaration it wasn't just a case that the tenants have advised them they've moved in. They have actually witnessed your tenants in the property with belongings functioning effectively as a household in that respect.
Right, thank you, Sarah. Councillor Gardner, you would like to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as I've said earlier, I do work at St Mary's College at Durham University, so I do have kind of experience of how the student movement is, and I'm looking at this on the balance of probability as set out in the recommendation. And I do think that given the activities towards the end of the summer, pre-starting of the term, again with the evidence that the applicant has provided, that on the balance of probability, they're probably very, very right. So for that, Chair, I'd like to move that as a motion that it is approved. And whilst I sympathise with neighbours, I do think on the balance of probability it's right. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. We do have a few councillors who would like to come back in. Hopefully they're coming back in with new points. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, Chair, I continue to struggle. It's he says, she says, really, and although they sworn affidavits and, you know, they must tell the truth, they sworn to it. Again, can I explore another avenue? Payment of rent. Have we evidence of that from that, starting from or including the particular date, which is before the Article 4 directive? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sarah, do we have any information on that?
I think to clarify, I don't believe we've actually seen sort of proof that payments have been made in terms of receipt of funds in bank accounts, etc. But we have seen copies of the tenancy agreements, which would presumably put the contractual obligation on those tenants to pay their rent accordingly. I think again it's probably a slightly moot point so far as actual occupation of the property goes, because you know one would assume they were paying rent for the sort of the July and August months before they actually moved into the property in September, because that was the requirements of the landlord to secure that place. So I think to answer the specific question, no, we don't have evidence that payments were actually received in bank accounts. But I think that's probably not pertinent to the overall issue of when actual occupation took place.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Now we have Councillor David Freeman who would like to come in now. Councillor Freeman.
It's really similar to Councillor Taylor. I think this is a very difficult decision because we're having to make a judgment on two different parties that in effect saying two completely different things. The tenancy agreement obviously doesn't help us because the tenancy agreement is prior to anyone physically moving in. I mean, it is my ward, and I think based on the grounds on probability, the residents would know whether students had moved in. We've just had two applications where we've talked about students. While some students are quiet, they're not so quiet that people who live next door to them do not know that they've moved in. And it seems unlikely, really, that 4 people could have been living in a house next to 2 residents on either side, and those residents not noticing that they're in the house. Very difficult, but I think we're all uncomfortable making any decision at all on this because it's simply us making a judgment on people's, well, on what people are saying, and I almost feel that we shouldn't have been put into this position. So that's all I've really got to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Now, as it stands, we have a mover to accept the recommendation that this order is granted. Councillor Gardner moved that a few speakers ago. Do we have a seconder for agreement with the motion?
Chairman?
Yes, Councillor Lang, I can hear you.
Right, thank you. Because Neil has cleared all the points that have been raised, I'd like to second the recommendation of approval.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Just before we go to the vote, and because this councillor hasn't spoken yet, Councillor Davidson, you've just indicated you'd like to speak. Is it on a new topic, or could you?
I was just coming in to say that exactly the same as Audrey said. I think that that Neil's explained that the evidence from one party's a bit hierarchical above the other party. So it doesn't mean that we don't believe that the objectors that are here. It's just that that I think that looking at it from a legal point of view, we need to take the evidence that's slightly higher than the other evidence, if you know what I mean, because it's a sworn affidavit. So I was just going to agree with the second and the motion.
Right, okay. Now, Councillor Taylor, you've indicated that you'd like to speak and you've spoken several times, but I'm going to indulge you with this. So if you'd like to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I love to be indulged on a Friday afternoon. I'm still very uncomfortable, Chair. I don't feel I have enough evidence before me or heard enough evidence to make an informed decision. Despite what the mover and seconder has said, I still feel I'm at a loss here. I find it very difficult to come to a decision. I don't have a definitive answer to any questions other than the signed statements. So, you know, just from me to you as a member of this committee, Chair, I'm in a ridiculous position of saying Mr. Ridley's correct or Mr. Holmes and Miss George is right, and I haven't got anything definitive to tell me which one is right. So I am really struggling. Whether I need more evidence or more evidence can be provided, definitive evidence to make my mind up for me, I don't really know. But that's the position I find myself in.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Councillor Taylor. So,
and Chair, if I could say as well, sorry, what is the legal position if we go against officers' recommendation? Well, how does it leave the council? Because again, we're in uncharted waters here. I've got no experience of this at all, although I've got 20 years in planning. I have no experience of this particular situation. What could happen if we go against the recommendation? What could the applicant do as regards challenging the council or taking legal action against us as a council?
I think that's a relevant point, and I'm going to pose that question to Neil Cart before we move forward, because it may well be there's a few councillors wondering the same thing. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Taylor. Neil, would you like to give us some information on that point?
Okay, thanks, Chair. I mean, look, this is a difficult situation. As members have said, you're being asked to make a judgment on competing evidence, and that's unfortunately often what these type of applications come down to. Now, clearly, our view as officers is that because one type of evidence is sworn and one isn't, then that's a good reason why you can prefer the evidence of the applicant as opposed to the evidence of the objectors. So you've got a number of options here. One is you accept the recommendation of the officers on that basis. You could, if you felt this was the appropriate thing to do, decide that you prefer the evidence of the objector. And if you prefer the evidence of the objector, then you'd have to refuse the application. There's a third possibility, which is that you feel that the evidence is so unclear in this particular case that you can't really reach a decision one way or the other. And in those circumstances, what you'd be saying is you'd be saying that the applicant has failed to discharge the burden of proof, and therefore, because on the balance of probabilities, you can't say one way or the other, then the burden of proof hasn't been met by the applicant, and therefore you'd have to refuse the application in those circumstances. So they're the sort of three options that you've got. I mean, I suppose, you know, there is a fourth option, which is what the parish council mentioned, which is to defer it. However, as I said previously, what is that going to achieve? All of the evidence that we're likely to get here is before you. So I think you just have to reach a decision one way or the other, how difficult that may be. Now, to answer the second part of Councillor Taylor's question, there's a right of appeal in the same way as there is for planning applications. So if the application were to be refused contrary to the officer's recommendation today, the applicant could appeal. There's a costs regime in exactly the same way as there is for appeals against planning applications. If you want an opinion from me as to whether we would get costs awarded against us. You know, if that's what you're concerned about. On balance, I think we'd have a reasonable chance of defending a cost application. However, as you know, that's only one relevant consideration. It shouldn't be given undue weight in the determination. It's not an overriding factor. It's something that you can have regard to, but it's certainly not something that I would say should be an overriding factor in the assessment of this. So really, I think drawing all that together, do you place more weight on the applicant's sworn evidence, in which case approve? Do you place more weight on the objector's evidence, in which case refuse? Or do you feel that you can't come to a firm view on which evidence to prefer, in which case you say the case is not proven and therefore the application is refused? They're your options, really.
Does that make it any clearer for you, Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, yes, slightly. And I mean, I trust our officers implicitly. They're always fantastic professional. We work together many times, as you know, Chair, and I appreciate and really believe in what they say. I have to say that they have a very difficult task in bringing this to us today. But again, I'm still in this position. I don't feel I'm qualified to make a judgment if you want me to be perfectly candid about it. But I will make a decision. I don't want to abstain. And I will make that decision in a few moments.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Paul. I mean, that to me is the only option that members have. If they're not comfortable, you would just abstain, and then we'll see how the vote goes at the end of it. So I will come back to the fact that we only have one motion on the table as we stand. So unless anybody wants to put forward another motion at this point, Neil, is there something that you would like to say before we go to the vote?
Yes, sorry, Chair, for sort of interrupting there before the votes, but it's just I'm aware that the applicant's agent is keen for me just to outline very briefly what the procedure is at an appeal. For this type of application, it would generally be the case that either a hearing or an inquiry would be held by the planning inspectorate. And the reason for that is so that certainly the reason for an inquiry would be to test the evidence by cross-examination. So that's the sort of process that would be involved at an appeal. I mean, I don't think it makes any difference to the decision that you have to reach today, but just so that you're aware, that's the likely process that would be employed by the planning inspectorate if it went to an appeal.
Yeah, thank you for that, Neil. That's just a little bit more information for us to know what goes on with that situation. So we will move back to the vote, and again, sorry, Neil, it comes back to you. Similar process as we've had earlier on. You'll do the roll call of councillors, and then we'll look at the decisions. So this motion was to approve the recommendation to approve the application. So if you can go ahead with the roll call now, Neil, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So as before, I'll go through each member and ask if you for or against this motion. So I'll start with Councillor Brown.
I would support the officer and support the motion.
Okay. And Councillor Malcolm Clark, are you for or against?
On the basis of the burden of proof not being met, I'm unfortunately against.
Okay. And Councillor Corrigan, are you for or against?
I'm for the officer's recommendation.
Okay. And Councillor Colt, for or against?
Against, please. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Davidson, for or against?
For.
Councillor Freeman, are you for or against?
Against.
Councillor Gardner, are you for or against?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lang, are you for or against?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland, are you for or against?
For.
And I think finally, Councillor Taylor, are you for or against?
Chair, on the balance of probabilities, I'm for.
Okay, Chair, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Chair, I make that 7-3 in favour.
Yes, thank you, Neil. So members, that wasn't the normal application that we come across. I think we've all learned quite a bit, you know, through this process. So thank you, everybody, for your patience and your intelligent questions. But the outcome of that application was that we are approving the officer's decision to grant that certification. So thank you very much, members. Item 6, any other business? Now, I haven't been notified of any other business, you'll be pleased to note, and I haven't invented any while we've been sat here. So at this juncture, it falls to me to close the meeting. And I would sincerely thank everyone who's took part this morning. I think it's been a huge learning curve for everybody, and I think we've all managed amazingly well. So thank you very much, committee. I look forward to seeing you all in the council chamber for our next outing. That does conclude the business, but I do have to inform you, because the IT guy will come in any second now if I don't, that the broad